Felina mai kako, welcome to Keep It Aloha, a podcast that keeps it aloha by dropping knee, spitting poetry, getting degree after degree, all while raising a family. I'm your host Kamaka, and I just offended hundreds of slam poetry communities. That was just my attempt at bragging about our guest today though, while also trying to rhyme it all. As you probably guessed, we have another impressive guest today, but before we introduce him, I gotta remind you to check out keepitaloha.com to get your favorite KIA merch. If supporting us with money doesn't work for you, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Something simple as that means the world to me, as long as it's a 5-star review. All right, let's introduce our guest. Our guest today is an entrepreneur and changemaker from the island of Oahu. He is a former teacher and writer who has taught creative writing and performing arts in numerous high schools. At 19 years old, he became the state's youngest slam poetry champion ever and has traveled the country representing Hawaii at 13 poetry festivals. This Harvard graduate and Honolulu Community College graduate as well, is also a co-founder and served as executive director of Housing Hawai'i's Future, a nonprofit movement creating opportunities for Hawaii's next generation by ending the workforce housing shortage. In 2025, he resigned from this position and is ready for his next adventure as an entrepreneur. As you just learned, he has so many accolades, but above all, he's a husband and father of 4, and I am so stoked to talk stories with him today. His name is Sterling Higa. Aloha, Sterling. Welcome to the Keep It Aloha podcast. How are you doing?
Awesome. Thank you, Kamaka. That is the best introduction I've ever received.
Is it because I added Honolulu Community College?
No, it was definitely the rhyming, but adding Honolulu Community College was the cherry on top.
I should have added community to like all the family and poetry and all of that.
It was good.
Yeah. Well, coming from a state champion of poetry, I feel really honored to hear that.
No, I appreciate the effort. I think it's difficult, I think, to introduce anyone, but I have done a few different things. And so how somebody chooses to introduce me really affects how people perceive me. They could lead with, oh, he's a poet, or they could lead with any of the other things that have happened. And it all colors what somebody thinks.
Totally, yeah. I just like to brag about my guests in the beginning. That's basically what it is. Yeah. Is getting the audience hyped for what they're about to hear. And nice to meet you. This is our first time meeting, but I've seen you on social media. I've seen clips of you talking about some really important issues here in Hawaii. And I just told you off the podcast, I just think you're a really good speaker. You seem super knowledgeable. After researching you, of course, it makes sense with your extensive background. So I'm super excited for our audience to get to know you and, hopefully grow your platform from you coming on our platform. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'm super stoked you're here. I like to start at the beginning. Where are you from? Where you grad? And what was it like growing up?
I grew up in Nu'uanu. I was raised by a single mother. When I say Nu'uanu, I mean town. And when people say town, they mean like Kaimuki or Kalihi, but that's not really town. I grew up maybe 3 or 4 blocks from downtown. And my mom worked as a paralegal in construction litigation law firms. And so I spent a lot of time in those high-rise buildings downtown. Late nights while she was working, me just puttering around under a desk or something. And went through public school. So I went to Royal Elementary, then to Kawananakoa Middle School, and then on to Roosevelt High School. And so up until that point, my whole life was within, that 1 mile radius of downtown.
So you grew up in a bubble.
I grew up in a bubble, yeah. Downtown. People in Hawaii don't understand, I think, what real urban life is like. I lived the most urban life that you could live.
Yeah, isn't the Royal School right off the freeway or something?
Yep, right next to the freeway.
Yeah, so you were just in the thick of it. That's crazy. I don't think I've ever met anybody that went to that school. Is it really small?
It's a super small school. Most of the students there are coming from just the immediate neighboring areas in town. It's not really a school that people get geographic exemptions to go to.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So what were you into growing up? I mean, obviously we just mentioned the poetry, so I'm guessing that, or maybe you had other hobbies growing up?
I was not a poet growing up. It actually came after I was 18. When I was in elementary, middle, and high school, I was probably really into bodyboarding. So my uncle Claude was a real mentor of mine, male role model. And on Saturdays, he would take me out. And, you know, part of that was giving my mom a break. She was a single mom. And part of it is my Uncle Claude was a woodworker. He would take me on adventures. So he'd be doing woodwork, like repairing yachts in the harbor. He'd be doing woodwork up on like Hawaii Lower Ridge, repairing cabinetry. Or we'd be down at his shop, which was just a warehouse on Dillingham. And in the afternoons, after I was like 8, 9, 10, he would start to take me bodyboarding. So my Uncle Claude was a body surfer and a handboarder out at Point Panics. I grew up sort of being on the rocks, just sort of sitting there with the dog while he would go out and surf. And then once I was old enough to sort of start getting into the water, that's what we would do. So all of the South Shore town spots, Kiwalos, Point Panic, all the way down to Walls, then around Diamond Head, Sandy Beach, Makapu'u. For middle and high school, that was what I loved. That was even like what I thought my future would be. I thought I would like live in a van and just bodyboard all the time. But it did not turn out that way.
Okay, well, now you guys know the drop knee reference now.
Yes, yeah.
I saw a picture on his Instagram of him dropping knee.
Yeah, and I don't get in the water as much anymore, so I'm glad that there is documentation.
You can show your kids.
I can show the kids, like, yeah, Dad actually used to rip.
Yeah. I'm cool, I swear.
Yeah, right. There was a time when I was cool.
Do you not consider yourself cool now? It's too busy doing, I guess, the trying to change Hawaii's future.
I think with anything, right, as you get older, your idea of cool shifts.
Yeah.
So I thought in high school that I was really cool. I'm bodyboarding, you know. Now I still enjoy bodyboarding. I just don't make time for it. I was talking about this with a friend. I was like, clearly I must not enjoy it that much because when I do have free time, I don't. And you know, I live now a 10-minute drive from Ala Moana, so if I wanted to go surf, I could. It's not a priority anymore. Yeah. Part of that, my son Isaac, he's 10, and for a while we would go together, but then he really got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, nice.
And one day he told his mom, my wife, you know, do I have to go surfing with Dad? Because I really just want to focus on Jiu-Jitsu. And so Chanel, my wife, told me, and I had to tell him, I'm like, Isaac, it's okay. The only reason I was going surfing was to spend time with you. Like, if you don't want to surf, like, it's okay. I'm not forcing you to surf. If you enjoyed it. So now he does jujitsu, and I don't get in the water at all.
Oh, okay. Do you ever think about doing jujitsu?
I used to. So I trained at Gracie Technics in Kalihi for a couple of years. Trained at Island Jiu-Jitsu a little bit during the pandemic. But I just had recurring staph infections. And so like I would train for 6 months and then I would get a staph infection and I'd get on antibiotics and I'd feel like I'm going to die. And then I would get better and I'd start training again and it'd be like 6 months and then I'd get another staph infection. And maybe like the 4th or 5th round of that, I just was like, this is probably not worth it for me. I love it. I really enjoy jiu-jitsu. Still have a lot of good friends from training at Gracie and Island Jiu-Jitsu and even Maui Jiu-Jitsu on Maui. But for my health, and especially now having a family, I just can't. I can't afford to get sick.
Yes. Well, that's a good call, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So after graduating high school, you ended up going to Honolulu Community College at first?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was not the best high school student. I graduated with a 2.9 GPA, so I was a C student, literally.
C's get degrees, and you ended up getting degrees.
I got the degree. I have the diploma. My mom told me, you can go to college or you can pay rent. And I was like, well, I'm going to go to college. My plan was I was working at Wahoo's Fish Tacos as a dishwasher. Wow. I was just going to wash dishes and live in a van at the beach. And my mom was like, you should probably go to college. So Honolulu Community College, if you graduate from a public high school in Hawaii, you're automatically admitted. So I applied and I was automatically admitted and I went there. And in my first month of college, September 2009, I wandered into a poetry writing workshop. And I still remember the date, September 9th, 2009, was the day that sort of the inflection point of my life is that day.
Wow.
Because it was sort of a room like this, and we're sitting around a table writing poetry. And there were these two young men next to me, Itai Wong and Alaka'i Kotries. And they were writing these poems, and we're all writing poems. And nobody knows what everybody else has written. And then at the end, it comes time to share. And I felt really proud because I'd written like 16 bars because I thought I was a rapper. And I like read my things, and I felt so good. I was like, man, I'm such a good writer. And then Itai and Alaka'i read their poems, and it was like amazing. It was like the best poems I'd ever heard in my life. And I was like, what are these guys on? And I didn't find out until a little bit later that like 3 weeks before that, they had gone to the Brave New Voices International Youth Poetry Slam, and they had won their second consecutive world title. So they were literally the best youth poets in the world. And it just so happened on my first day walking into this writing workshop, I sat next to them. And you know, when sometimes you see somebody doing something and you're like, I want to do that. I saw Itai and Alaka'i, and I was like, I want to do that. Whatever that is that they're doing, this poetry stuff, I want to do that. And for 6 years, that was pretty much my whole life, was doing poetry.
Dang.
Yeah.
So how did you end up becoming the youngest state champ?
So washing dishes at Wahoo's Fish Tacos, going to these writing workshops, I started going to poetry slams and performing. The poetry slam that I went to in February 2010 was Hawaii Slam. So they used to call it First Thursdays at Fresh Cafe. Mm-hmm. And I performed a couple of poems, and I ended up winning that poetry slam. And if you won a poetry slam at that point, you got qualified for the state championship. And every year in April, there'd be 12 poets from around the state who had won other poetry slams, and they'd compete in the Grand Slam Championship. It just so happens that the first Thursday of 2010 was on April 1st, which was my birthday.
Oh.
So on my birthday, April 1st, 2010, I am one of 12 poets that is in this Grand Slam Championship. And there are 3 rounds. So I make it through the first round without being eliminated. I made it to the second round without being eliminated. And in the third round, I actually started to run out of poems because I hadn't been writing poems that long. And so I still remember reading out of like a composition notebook, this poem that I had written about my father, who I have a complicated relationship with, and basically like crying and sharing this very heart-wrenching story of my relationship with my father in front of this audience of 400 people in Fresh Cafe. People who remember Fresh Cafe know, large warehouse, ground floor, there was a loft floor, and then they'd roll up the garage door and people would stand outside and like smoke. And it was packed that night, 400 people. I read my poem and end up winning the poetry slam. And so on that day, my 19th birthday, became the youngest state champion.
What a great birthday. How does that birthday compare to all your other ones?
It's got to be up there, yeah.
Right.
Hard to top that feeling, that adrenaline rush. Prior to that point, I wanted to live in a van and bodyboard. Mm-hmm. My ambitions were very limited, very small. I didn't feel like I was talented or really good at anything. Look, I was a bodyboarder. I wasn't like that good. I can do like 360s and maybe a Rolo and maybe an ARS on a good day, but I was never going to enter contests and be a professional bodyboarder. That was out of the picture. Poetry was the first thing in my adult life that I was good at, and it changed my life.
That's so cool to hear that. I always like to learn about the very pivotal moment of people's lives and how it really leads them into the rest of their lives. For me, it was studying abroad, it was Peace Corps, it was the other stuff that I'm doing, and now podcasts. And I feel like everybody at some point has that moment where it really changed your life and the direction of your life.
Yeah, and you can only see it looking back.
Yeah. You're not in the moment. You're not like, this is my life is changing in this moment right now.
Yeah. Even sitting next to Itai and Alaka'i, I didn't know that would lead to becoming a state champion. I didn't even know there was traveling. I didn't know there were poetry festivals. I didn't know that there were poetry teams. I didn't know any of that. All I knew was I'm in a room with people writing, and these two guys are really good.
Yeah.
And yet, if I look back at my life, that moment leads to so many other things.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because as, local boys growing up in Hawaii, you mentioned van, living at the beach, that was your ceiling. Mm-hmm. That's what you thought the peak of life was. And for me, growing up in Hilo, it was like, okay, maybe I get a job in Hilo. Maybe I work at Walmart or one of the other restaurants that over there. Maybe I go become a nurse at the Hilo hospital. You don't know what else is out there until you leave, until you're surrounded by other people who are doing other things. You didn't even know the poetry thing was a thing until you met those guys. And now that took you to other places and then traveled. And then, yeah, it's just, that's why I encourage people just to do stuff.
Yeah.
Don't stay at home. Go and do stuff.
Yeah, meet somebody, try something. It's little chance encounters like that that have huge inflection points. So, just on Friday nights, I try to do date night with my wife. We went to FET.
Nice.
My good friend Harrison, who was doing poetry with me 15 years ago now, is now a sous chef at FET.
Oh, wow.
And so we go out on date night and like Harrison's able to bring out food. I didn't know, neither of us could have anticipated how our lives would sort of branch out from being friends 15 years ago and still being really good friends today. We don't see that. We just run into each other and vibe immediately. But there's no knowing that he would be my best man at my wedding, right?
Wow.
There's no way to know in advance all of the things that can come out of one relationship or one poetry writing workshop. So I've been very blessed in that way.
Totally. It's just like I never knew this one guy sliding into my DMs one day would produce the biggest podcast in Hawaii.
Yeah. No, there it is. You're the Hawaii Joe Rogan, for real.
Yeah, that's how basically how Jordan connected. He wanted to produce podcasts, and then so he DM'd me. He's like, "Hey, I want to produce podcasts. Can I do a couple episodes for free?" And then what? 2 years later, maybe, and then here we are.
Yeah, Jordan's in the back. He's the Hawaii Jamie.
Yeah, exactly. And they both start with J, so
yeah,
that's pretty funny. All right, so going back to your college era, you were at HCC, did the poetry stuff, and then where did you go from there? Because you ended up at UH, right?
I went to UH, and I wanted to study English and be a high school English teacher. But when you transfer from community college to the university, you're the last one to register for classes. So I wanted all the English classes, and by the time it was my turn to register, they were all full. So I was like, well, what am I going to do? That's my major. I'm a junior. I ended up looking at the speech classes because they were all close together on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So it was like intro to public speaking, interpersonal communications, conflict management, very basic courses about communication and speech that are really important in life. I just sort of lucked into those courses. And so after taking a bunch of classes my first semester in speech, I said, I'm just going to shift my major and become a speech major and then minor in English instead. And that's what I did. So I studied speech at the University of Hawaii. Because I had been doing poetry and teaching poetry, I got involved with Youth Speaks Hawaii, first as a teen poet, then as a youth mentor, then as an event coordinator. By the time I got to UH, I was organizing events. I was teaching workshops in public high schools. And so I got a call from Punahou to coach their debate team. And the call was basically just, we hear you're really good at public speaking. Can you coach these kids? And the coaching was also just sort of supervising and making sure that there was somebody there to keep them accountable. I'd never debated. At the same time I get that call to go coach debate at Punahou, the UH debate coach, his name was Rob Bowler, reached out and said, hey, are you interested in debating at UH? And I said, well, sure. So I ended up debating for UH for 2 years, and I was really bad. You may not believe this, but I was actually terrible at debating. I went to 3 debate tournaments in California during the 2 years I was at UH, junior and senior year. And at all of the tournaments, my team finished in the bottom half of teams.
Wow.
So like below average and really bad. And I wouldn't have anticipated then that debate would become the next big chapter of my life. It seemed like it was done when I graduated from UH.
Dang. So you were good at public speaking, just bad at debating.
Yeah, and I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a lack of confidence. Maybe it was the way that we were training was not right. But I hadn't matured into the debater that I would become a few years later in those first 2 years.
Okay.
Which is part of now, I coached debate after I was a debater. I debated for about 5 years, 2 years at UH as an undergrad, 1 year at Harvard, and then 2 years as a graduate student at UH. And then I coached debate for another 3-4 years after that. And when I would coach debate, I'd tell people, it doesn't matter where you start, you can actually get pretty good. You might suck for 2 years. You might be really bad. And I could actually I could testify to that because
you're living proof.
I was really bad. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So finished UH in 2013.
Okay. So here's a question, and we'll get back to your college. How's your debating now, and how does it go with your wife?
Yeah, I try not to debate with my wife. So I'll be honest. I spent about probably 10 years debating or coaching debate, and at the end of those 10 years, I came around to the position that debating is a useful skill, but for a lot of people who practice debate, it actually ends up harming them, I think. And part of it is, in order to win a debate, you're not trying to like seek truth or find the answer to a question. You're just trying to convince like a bunch of judges.
You're manipulating people.
You're right. You're just trying to convince a bunch of people sitting over there, well, I'm smarter than this guy, right? And the way that you do that, if you want to be successful in debate, is not equivalent to what you would do if you were trying to reach a compromise or find a solution or find the truth. And so I would have this tension when I was coaching debate and teaching debate, because on the one hand, this very skills that I would tell somebody that will help them win a debate tournament are probably not useful if they're talking to their wife, right? Like in a debate tournament, it would help if I make the person I'm debating look dumb, because the judges will be like, well, I don't want to vote for the person who looks dumb, so I'll vote for the person who looks smart. If you do that with your wife, like it's over.
You might not have a wife.
Right, exactly. And so with my wife, she'll call me out in moments where I'm falling into that debating pattern. But for the most part, when we have serious conversations, it's not from a standpoint of debate.
Yeah. It's not you versus her. It's you two versus the problem.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be on the same side of the table.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I just had to ask that. Okay, so you ended up graduating from UH, and then how did you end up at Harvard? You're a 2.9 graduate who wasn't good at school, wanted to be in a van surfing the rest of your life, and then you end up at one of the most prestigious Ivy League schools.
So I became a better student at community college and at UH. As soon as I was paying for my education with the money that I was earning, working various part-time jobs, everything started to click, where I sort of started to understand. I also figured out that school was a game of sorts, right? Like if you just did what was on the syllabus and you asked the teacher questions, you could pretty much get an A. There was a system that you could follow. I don't think I understood that system in high school. I just didn't really care because I wasn't paying to be there and I didn't know the system. So I was a better student at the end, and I was helping to run You Speaks Hawaii, which was this arts nonprofit. We taught creative writing, performing arts in the public high school system. We would host community poetry slams and open mics. So at the time that I was done with undergraduate, I was hosting these large events. Sometimes 250, 300 people would show up to watch teams from a bunch of public high schools share their poetry. Really powerful stuff. And I thought at the time, if I go get a master's degree in education, I can come back and continue leading this nonprofit or lead an arts nonprofit. And that was my ambition at the time. So at the time, I was also dating a girl who was going to school on the East Coast, and I wanted to be closer to her. So I looked for a master's in education that was 1 year, because I couldn't afford 2 years, that was from a good school in education, and that would be on the East Coast so I could be closer to my girlfriend at the time. Harvard sort of had a 1 year program, master's in education. It was on the East Coast, and it just happened to be like one of the best schools in the world. So I was like, well, that seems like the choice, right? I'm going to choose that one. And I did and applied. And so I did everything that I thought I needed to do to get in. My statement of purpose, I had 3 people help edit it. I rewrote it like 24 times, from front to back. I went up to do the visit day where you meet the people. I asked the director of the program I was applying to, like, what can I do to really maximize my chance to get in? And just did everything I could to get in. And my mom at the time asked me, she's like, what are you going to do if you don't get in? And I was like, I'll just apply again next year. I had my mind set. And I was like, I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to do this program. I'm going to then work in nonprofits. And so that's how I got into Harvard. I don't know, I had the will and I really wanted it.
Totally. Sounds like, already learning your story up to this point, sounds like you need a book.
Maybe.
That's why I'm listening. I feel like I'm listening to an audiobook.
Maybe.
Which is basically podcasting. But
Yeah.
No, because I just got into audiobooks. I listened to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Knew about that book forever.
Yep.
Robert Kiyosaki's from Hilo, where I'm from. So I just always knew about it, but just never pulled the trigger. And then, yeah, now I'm really into audiobooks.
Oh, they're great. So,
Yeah.
Having 4 kids now, a lot of times if I am driving in the car, that might be the only time in a day that I have time
Yeah,
to
exactly.
to listen to something. And so I'm a fiend for
Yeah.
audiobooks.
Do you ever read? I gave up on reading physical books because I like physical books, flipping the pages, having it in your hand, but it's just the timing, the
Yeah.
time doesn't always work out.
I love physical books. I have hundreds at home, too many, and I keep ordering more. But a few months ago, maybe 4 months ago, I finally bought a Kindle. And I was like a physical book elitist. I was like, I'm never going to get an e-reader. And I admit I love it. And I love it because I think on my Kindle right now, I have like 36 books. So like if I have 10 minutes, 15 minutes to sit down and read, I can just think to myself, well, what do I want to read? And then just pull it out. And anywhere I am, I have access to all of those books, plus, hundreds of other books that I've read. And I can just see whatever it is I'm interested in. I will admit I'm probably like the single reason Amazon stock keeps rising, because I just keep buying more and more of these books because I'm like, that looks interesting. That looks interesting. I at this point, it's probably like e-reader and then audiobooks and then physical books for me. But I do love the tactile part of the physical book.
Okay, awesome. So how was your time at Harvard? Because you're only there for a year, right?
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a type A person, and Harvard, the best way to describe it to people who haven't been there is it's just a city, because Harvard and MIT are right next to each other in Cambridge. Boston as a city has like the highest percentage of colleges, like per capita, than any. So it's just a city full of type A people, right? like hard driving, very intellectual people who, want to get higher and higher educations, masters, doctorates. And Harvard itself is like a city of all of these different graduate schools. So there's Harvard College, which is for undergraduates. Then there's the law school, the business school, the education school, the design school, and it's a tiny city. So for the whole year, I'm essentially surrounded by all of these type A people, which on the one hand is really inspiring, because like if you come from a small school or a small town, like you may not have thousands of type A people around you, right? Just because they're not there. But when you go to a place like that, you're just constantly surrounded. And so that's inspirational. It makes you want to work harder. And on the other hand, it's also a recipe for burnout, for depression, for anxiety, because you look around and everybody else seems to be succeeding way more than you are. Everybody's doing something all the time. There'd be days, right, where it's like, well, do you want to go to the Kennedy School to see Prime Minister Abe from Japan, or do you want to go see Cornel West speak? And you have to make that decision. Like, well, which do I want to do? I can only do one. So FOMO is real, because on any given night, there's so many things you could do. You feel like you can never do it all. And you feel like somebody smarter and harder working than you is doing more. So it was great. It was one of the, in retrospect, looking back, 10 years later, it was one of the best years of my life. At the time, living through it, it was one of the hardest years of my life. Because if you come from a small school or a small town and you are a type A person, you feel like a big fish in a small pond. And then you go to a place like Harvard and you feel like the small fish in like a huge pond, right? And I was definitely feeling like a small fish in a big pond there. At the same time, I also knew that I wanted to come back to Hawaii. I just had the sense that anything I could do that was good would be in a place that I knew and understood. And so I wanted to come home. And by the end of the year, I was eager to come home.
How many instruments do you play?
I used to play the clarinet, none now.
I knew you played something.
Yeah. Middle school, high school band, clarinet. And then the clarinet is not really an instrument you can bust out at a party.
Hey, guys, want to see me play my clarinet?
Yeah. Or like when you go to a party, like very rarely do they just have a clarinet there that you can play. So after high school, I stopped playing.
Oh, okay. Cool. I know. I'm just thinking, okay, he's done all these things. He probably knows some sort of instrument.
I wish I knew how to play the piano or the guitar or something.
You're not Asian enough. If you're more Asian, guarantee.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's so cool that you had that experience because how many local kids do you get to meet, and somebody went to Harvard.
Sure.
I think it's really inspiring to other people hearing your story. Um, what was it like? Because you said you were around Type A people, but what about the culture? We
Yeah.
have the culture on the continent, we have the culture in Hawaii, and it's so different. And a lot of people, I don't mean to like. I'm speaking specifically from my experience. Is
Hmm.
that they're more selfish or more like ego driven, more just like me over everybody else. Where Hawaii is a collective culture where we're putting others in front of ourselves. I'm thinking about our ohana, our community. That's how it is, over here compared to some other places on the
Hmm.
continent. So how was like trying to navigate through all of that?
In general, I think that stereotype is
Hmm.
correct. The Northeast is, in a lot of ways, colder than Hawaii, both
Yeah,
literally,
I was
but
thinking that.
also figuratively in the sense of people are a little bit more distant. They're slower to sort of connect. At Harvard, in particular, people are there usually just for a short period of time, and their focus there is on advancing whatever it is they're trying to do. So relationships can feel sort of transactional, very short term. And I don't think I really liked that. I liked being in a place from Hawaii. I have a friend, Kaimana, who says she moved back to Maui after going to school, and part of it was she wanted to live in a place where she wasn't anonymous.
Hmm.
If you're in a big city like Boston or Cambridge, you walk around, nobody's going to know who you are. New York City, right? Nobody knows who you are. And that's great. It can be liberating,
Hmm.
to just walk around and wear what you want and be funky and no one's giving you stink eye. On the other hand, though, there's something very nice in walking to a local coffee shop or a local restaurant and the server, the barista, and they know you and you know them and you see them every day.
And they know your auntie,
And they
and
know your auntie, right?
you went to school with their nephew or whatever like
Yes.
that.
And so at Harvard, I was sort of anonymous. I was lucky, though, because I was at the education school. So, the law school, yes, very transactional,
Mm.
very like hard driving. The business school, same thing. The education school, a little bit warmer and fuzzier. These are educators, principals, people who work around young people and want to make a difference in the world. Everybody there really cared about what they were doing. They wanted to change the world through education. And so it was probably the best of both worlds. You get a little bit of that hard driving culture and then a little bit of the warm and sort of cuddly moments.
Awesome, cool. So, what year are we at now when
This
you
is
finished Harvard?
graduate in 2015, so in
2015.
May of 2015.
Okay, and then after that, you came to Hawaii.
I came back.
How did you end up on Maui?
Yeah, so we're not at Maui yet. So
Okay.
I come back 2015. I actually don't have a job. And
Okay.
part of it was when I was at Harvard, my first semester, I took a course in nonprofit management because I'm going to run an arts nonprofit. And while taking the course, I realized the finances of the nonprofit I was working for, were not good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, wait, we're not fundraising enough. We don't really have oversight from a board of directors. If I were a consultant working with my nonprofit, I would tell them you're about to fail, which was true. By the time I got back from Harvard, essentially, it had sort of fallen apart and there wasn't really a path there for me career-wise. So I was depressed when I came back, both from seasonal affective disorder from being through the winter, from really being burned out from working really hard for the year, but also my whole career path in the future of arts nonprofits had fallen apart because Hawaii is not San Francisco or Boston or New York City. In some of these larger metropolitan areas, you can fund an arts nonprofit because a bank will give you like $10 million. There are banks that are very generous in Hawaii, but they're not big enough to give you $10
They
million.
ain't that generous.
Right. They're just not big enough to sustain that. So
Yeah.
I knew that if I wanted to do the arts nonprofit work that I wanted, it would probably be in like San Francisco or something, or I'd really be struggling in Hawaii. I didn't decide. I just came back and I didn't have a job. So the whole summer, I'm just sort of schlepping around being like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I don't have a job. I have this degree. And I got an email from Buffy Cushman-Pates, who is the school leader of a school called SEEKS, the School for Examining Essential Questions of Sustainability. At the time, it was a middle school based in Kaimuki on the old Salvation Army campus. And they were focused on sustainability. And it was a project-based learning school. So the kids did a lot of field trips, a lot of projects. And Buffy had seen me in the Harvard Alumni magazine because she was also a Harvard Ed School alum. And she emailed me and said, hey, I am hiring a performing arts teacher. I know that you do poetry. Like, would you be interested? And I was like, well, yes, actually, because I don't have a career. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I accepted that job. And at the same time, I enrolled in a PhD at UH so I could debate. And the reason I wanted to debate was at Harvard, I had just gotten looped into the debate team. Somebody on the debate team got sick and was going to miss a tournament. And so I knew some people and they knew that I had done debate. So they were like, hey, Sterling, can you just jump in for this tournament? And I was like, sure, I guess. I went to the tournament with this young woman, Joy, and we did pretty good, like better than I'd ever done. And I started to think in that moment, I was like, maybe I'm better now, or maybe being in this environment has changed me. So I went to a few more tournaments that year and did really well. And even won a novice tournament up there in a format that I hadn't competed in. And that made me think, well, maybe I should try again. So when I came back to UH, I enrolled in a PhD in education just so I could join the debate team. One of my best friends, Daniel Hugo, was at the law school doing his 2L year. And I told Daniel, I'm going to come back to UH and I want us to debate together. So we debated together. We went to Canada to a tournament at the University of British Columbia. We went to Yale. And then we went to the World Championship, which was in Greece. And we did okay. Again, we did pretty well in Canada. We did okay at Yale, and we did not do very good at the World Championship. And so again, I was sort of like, well, maybe I'm not that good. Part of it is Daniel was just really busy and had difficulty committing to training. So Daniel got really busy, and I had to partner with someone else. And so this young woman, Geraldine Duff, I think was a sophomore at the time at UH, and we started debating together. And for 3 semesters, we just went on an absolute tear. And part of it was UH teams, because we're in the middle of the ocean, could only go to like 1 or 2 tournaments a year because they're college students, they didn't have money, and the university really didn't fund the debate team at all. So that, when I went to my 3 tournaments as an undergraduate, we just got smoked at each one, and I was sad. Geraldine and I went to 5 or 6 tournaments a year because she had a job, she was working, and I had a job and I was working, and we could afford to bankroll some of our own travel. So we traveled around the world. We went to Jamaica, we went to Canada, we went to the Netherlands, and we had a lot of success. Together, Geraldine and I racked up more competitive accomplishments than every other team from Hawaii combined.
Wow.
And part of that, I think, was just while I was at Harvard, my teammates on the debate team were world champions, like literally the world champions. And I saw the way they trained. So it was bringing back being with Itai and Alakai. I was in the room with them, and I looked at them, and I was like, I'm not as good as you, right? But if I do what you do, I could get a result closer to your result. And so I saw the way they practiced at Harvard. One of the things they did is they would do a practice round, and nobody would even judge the practice round. They just like come in, because they're all Harvard students, right? So they just like come into a room for an hour, like do a practice round, and then they'd all leave. And for a while, I'm like, what is this? Like nobody's even giving them feedback. And then I realized, oh, they give themselves feedback because they know, right? They've been doing this for a while. They're really successful. As they're doing the round, they're thinking about, how can I improve? So when Geraldine and I were competing, we would do our practices up at UH 3-4 times a week. We'd just like turn a laptop around and like hit record and just like record our practice rounds. There was nobody there a lot of times to give us feedback. And then I'd watch it back and I'd give us feedback or give myself feedback. Fortunately, Daniel was able to help us as a coach. We had other coaches, Cody Henserling, Jonathan Cham, who volunteered their time to coach us. And we just succeeded beyond what either of us thought was possible.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Again, another great lesson at just taking the opportunities that's presented to you and working hard so that opportunity doesn't pass over you. I love that. That's so cool. So you had success, I guess your second go around at this debate thing, and you're still working at Seeks?
Seeks, yep.
And then Okay, what happened
It's
after
2017, and I get a phone call.
that? Yeah, I feel like I need a notepad to start
Yeah,
taking notes.
I know. It's 2017. I get a phone call from Hawaii Pacific University, and they are looking for someone to coach their debate team and to teach public speaking and writing courses. And they asked if I would apply. And so I did apply. And at the time, I'm in a PhD program, but I don't have my PhD. I have a master's degree. So I applied, and then I wait a couple months and I don't hear anything back. And then in April of 2017, Geraldine and I go to the U.S. National Championship, and we make the semifinal round, which is the best result a team from Hawaii has ever achieved on the national stage. And so I emailed HPU. I was like, hey, I need to update my resume. Like, this is important to add to the resume. And they were like, oh, we don't have your resume. I was like, what do you mean you don't have my resume? Like, I submitted it like a month and a half ago. And they go, oh, let me check with HR. So the communication department never got my application packet. I guess HR had seen that my PhD was in progress but not complete, so they just screened me out, and they didn't even give it to the comms department called me to ask me to apply. They didn't even get my application. So because I called them to update my application, they got my application and they were like, okay, you're hired. And I was immediately hired. Started teaching public speaking and writing courses. It was really fun. I was right there at Waterfront Plaza. Not high school students, college students, a lot of freshmen, sophomores, taking public speaking courses for the first time, coaching the debate team, traveling around the country, taking them around. It was a really fun time. So I was there for about 2 years before Civil Beat emailed me. So there are lots of emails in my life, in retrospect, now that I'm telling you this. Civil Beat emails, and it was Ben Nishimoto who runs their philanthropic side, and he said, we're having a writing contest to find a millennial voice to be a columnist. And I had written a few things for Civil Beat in their like op-ed community voices section. And so Ben knew who I was, and he was like, you should apply. And I said, okay, I'll write an essay. So I wrote this essay. And it was the second time after Harvard where I just knew. And this is cocky, but I like told people, I'm going to enter this contest and win it.
Nice.
Which is like a really, it's, but athletes do the same thing, right? They believe they're going to win.
We got to speak it into existence.
Right. I said, I'm going to enter, I'm going to win. And just like with my Harvard statement of purpose, I rewrote that essay like over and over again, maybe like 18 times. And I had a bunch of people give me feedback on it. And I understood what the editors wanted because I had written some things for them in the past and I'd gotten their feedback. So I sort of understood. And I wrote an essay, and the essay was about homelessness among the elderly. Because what I had observed walking around downtown is the average age of homeless people that I was seeing was just going up and up and up. And if you looked at the trend of aging in Hawaii, anybody with a brain would know that 5-10 years from now, there are going to be way more seniors who are homeless because a lot of baby boomers didn't save enough for retirement, cost of housing was going up. And so I wrote this piece because it was really alarming to me to see that. My mom she just retired last year, and I'd see women who looked just like my mom. I'd be like, oh my God, right? Like there, but for the grace of God, go I. That is alarming, and I wrote about it, and I knew that it would win, and it won. So Civil Beat hired me in 2019 to write a column. And I sort of had free reign to write about whatever I was interested in, which was fun. My first column was about architecture. I was like, the problem with Mayor Wright is the architecture. Like, it just is soulless and it makes you sad. And so what if public housing could actually be beautiful and make people feel good about themselves? I wrote a column about the state employee retirement system, which is sort of boring for a 28-year-old. That's not something you usually are interested in. But I was interested. I was fascinated. I was like, I think if I email the director of the employee retirement system and tell him I'm writing a column about this, he'll take an hour to meet with me. And he did. So I'm meeting with like Tom Williams, and I'm asking him, how do you approach risk? Like, how do you hedge against some, big event that could potentially affect all of these people's retirements? How do you manage $17 billion from a small office in downtown? And he answered all my questions, and I wrote a column about it. And that led to an email that would change my life even more. But I'll pause there because that's a whole nother chapter, is being at HPU, starting to write for Civil Beat.
Okay. Well, pause. Continue.
Yeah, you want the email.
I want to know.
Man, telling you this, Kamaka, I realize emails just changed my life. I get an email one day from a man named Colbert Matsumoto, who has been a mentor of mine for the last 6 years. But on the day that he emailed me, I did not know who he was. And I'm Googling him, and I can't find much about him. I know that he's a businessman. He was in charge of Island Insurance and then Island Holdings, which owns a few other companies, including Atlas Insurance and Paxa and Tradewind Capital. And so I know he's a businessman. I know that he's involved in the Japanese American community. He helped with the Japanese Cultural Center. And I agree to meet him for lunch. And at lunch, we're sitting across from each other. He asks for my help in writing and presenting a report that would be called the Troubled Waters Report. And that report was to be presented for the Hawaii Executive Conference. So every year, about 100, 150 CEOs, executives, nonprofit executives, labor executives, business executives get together to talk about the big issues that are facing Hawaii. So every year they do it on a different island. It's just a chance for them to bond, to network, and to think about big problems. And so Colbert had been tasked by this group with writing a report about Hawaii's fiscal situation. So for the next 30 years, what do we have to spend in terms of employee retirements and pensions? What do we have to spend in terms of sea level rise adaptation and climate mitigation? And what do we have to spend in terms of infrastructure investments in our roads, highways, et cetera? And he wanted me, because he knew that I could write and speak, to write and then share the report at the conference. So that summer 2019, I wrote the report with a team of people, Jeff Laupola, a bunch of other folks. We worked on this report all summer. And then in October of that year, I went to the conference and presented. And so I'm standing in front of this room of like 150 CEOs. I'm like this 28-year-old kid. And I'm sharing this 10-minute presentation about, hey, here are these real costs ahead, $81 billion essentially in the next 30 years. And we have to sort of tighten our belts and get serious about investing in these things. Otherwise, they're going to catch us unexpected. And at the end, they all stand up and there's like a standing ovation. So there were 3 standing ovations at that conference. One was Nainoa Thompson, because of course. Yeah. Every time he speaks, people should stand up and give him a standing ovation. 2 was Peter Schwartz, who works at Salesforce. He's their chief future officer, a literal rocket scientist.
Wow.
I mean, like, he worked at NASA as a rocket scientist. And then it was me. And looking back now, I can sort of see that as this inflection point in my life where I started to meet some of Hawaii's leaders. But at the time, I was just like, wow, this is cool.
I feel good.
I feel good, yeah. And that was 2019. And then after that, I went back to, I was still teaching at Hawaii Pacific University. Hawaii Business Magazine called me. There was a moment where I was potentially going to join Hawaii Business Magazine in a staff role, but then the pandemic happened. So this is like the end of 2019, December of 2019, there's a virus in China. And by early of 2020, we're locked down. And I had to tell Hawaii Business Magazine, hey, I'm staying where I'm at Hawaii Pacific University. I know that I'm secure here. And so I did start writing for Hawaii Business Magazine, but I was just teaching and writing, now for a different magazine, not Civil Beat. I kept in touch with Colbert for a few years, and he was a mentor of mine. So every quarter or so, I'd be like, hey, can I come ask you some questions, maybe get some advice? And in probably around 2021, I went to him and I said, Colbert, I feel like I'm not doing enough. Like I'm teaching, and I enjoy teaching. I enjoy coaching debate. And I'm writing for Hawaii Business Magazine, and I'm enjoying the subjects I'm writing about. I wrote about everything. I wrote about unions. I wrote about the business of local journalism. I wrote about licensure requirements for various state professions, just all sorts of diverse topics. And Steve Petranek, the editor there, was really kind in just letting me write about what I found interesting. And I said, I enjoy writing. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy coaching debate. But I just feel like I could be doing more, but I don't know what that means. So I'm like, Colbert, like, should I become a banker? Like, what should I do? Should I be a businessman? And Colbert says, Sterling, you're having a philosophical crisis. And I go, yes. I was hoping you'd help me with that. And that was the end of the meeting. He just said, like, you're having a philosophical crisis. And that was the end of the meeting. About 6 months later, he calls me and introduces me to these two young men, Zachary Amata and Evan Gates. And Zachary Amata and Evan Gates had come up with the idea for what would become Housing Hawai'i's future. And they were both, again, lots of young men who are really smart sitting next to me, actually. This is really causing me to see my whole life in retrospect.
This is what the podcast, it's basically therapy.
It is. Zach was a Iolani grad, University of Notre Dame grad. He was here during the pandemic for 8 months before starting his career off at Comcast in New York City. And God willing, he and his fiance will be moving back soon.
Awesome.
So Zach and Haley, we hope to have you back in Hawaii soon. Evan Gates was a Kamehameha School's Kapalama graduate who was at Harvard, but was taking a gap year because of the pandemic because he didn't want to do remote classes. So they were both here. And they had come up with the idea for Housing Hawai'i's future. But of course, both of them had stuff to do, right? Zach had to go start a career. Evan had to go back to Harvard. And so they needed someone who could come in, take this business plan, and turn it into a real nonprofit, right? Like do the board development, the fundraising, the strategic planning, the program design, and then be an executive and run that nonprofit. And they're presenting the plan for this nonprofit. And 15 minutes in, I still didn't know. I was like, oh, these young men are really smart. They have this great idea. I was sort of dumb, I guess. 15 minutes into the coffee, I'm like, oh, it's me. I get it. This is like a job offer situation. You want me to do this. And they did. So, Zach and Evan served on the board. We had a bunch of other wonderful people. My old ally, Jeff Laupola, folks like Blair Suzuki, Katie Chang, April Nakamura, Talitha Liu, who served on that board, helped build this organization from the ground up. And for the last 3.5 years, what I was doing was leading this organization. So, the core of it is housing is really expensive, as we all know. And young people are very affected by this. Many are leaving Hawaii or they're really struggling to stay here. And we wanted to get them educated and organized about the housing issue so that they could advocate for solutions. Across the continent, there were these YIMBY movements, the Yes in My Backyard movements, a lot of them driven by young people who wanted solutions to housing. And we saw an opportunity in Hawaii to create that organization. So that was the birth of Housing Hawai'i's Future back in 2021, July.
That's when me and my co-founder started Hawaiiverse in 2021.
There you go.
Oh, actually, no, it was 2020. But we started a podcast in 2021. So some great things came out of the pandemic. And I like to hear other stories of, post-pandemic successes.
Yep.
So that's cool that you got to share that. So you were doing that for, I guess, since 2021, you just said. So about 4 years.
Yep, about 4 years, yeah.
4 years. And then was that all over here? How did you end up getting to Maui? Because then you just recently moved back
That's
to Oahu.
The right question.
Yeah.
So now we're going to Maui. It's 2021. I'm running the nonprofit. In 2022, I talked to my wife for the first time. She wasn't my wife then.
Yeah. But you knew it was going to be your wife, just like you knew you were going to.
I knew it very quickly. So my wife is named Chanel, and she's from Maui. And we had met on Twitter during the pandemic in like 2020.
Whoa, I've never heard of a Twitter meetup.
Yeah. And we just had mutual interests. I was on Twitter, and I was like, who is this beautiful woman? And then I was like, oh, she's from Maui. We have a lot of mutual interests. I'm going to slide into her DMs. Of course, she lived on Maui, so we never met each other and nothing romantic happened, but we kept in touch and just we'd message each other here and there. And then in 2022, I had broken up with a girl that I was dating during the pandemic. I was single. I was back home living with my mom, and I was going on a lot of dates on Tinder and Bumble and the dating apps. And it was very different for me because I knew that I wanted to get married and have a family. And so these dates were very abrupt in that I was going on like 12 dates a week.
How do you have the time for that?
Yeah. Well,
I don't think I've been on 12 dates in my life.
Yeah. Well, I had a flexible schedule because I was still, working. I'm going on these dates and I'm not feeling anything. Like I go for coffee and I didn't drink at the time. So these dates are just coffee pretty much, right? I meet somebody, we get coffee, we start talking. I realize 5 minutes in, this is not somebody I want to be with for the rest of my life. And then I'd politely talk to them for another 55 minutes and then that'd be it, right?
Yeah.
And I must have gone on like 24 of these dates.
Wow,
and
that's crazy.
at the end of it, I'm just in my room, and I remember being on my knees, like literally praying to God, being like, please God, like I do not want to go on any more dates. I want to get married. I want to have a family. Like, please God, just help, 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 help. And on April 29th, 2022, my wife sent me a text message, and it said, this may be weird. We've never talked on the phone, but would you want to talk on the phone tonight? And I said, sure, right? So that night we talked on the phone 3 hours.
Oh.
And then every day in the month of May 2022, we pretty much talked on the phone 2 or 3 hours a night. And at the end of that month, I went to Maui. We went on 3 dates, June 1st, June 2nd, June 4th, 2022. At the end of the third date, I could show you the text message on my phone. I texted my best friends, James and Keith. I said, hey, I think I'm going to move to Maui and marry this girl. I can show you the text message. The exact time when she left from our third date, the text message goes out to James and Keith. And 1 month later, I was on Maui. July 1st, I was living on Maui. July 9th, we were married. And
you got married 8 days after you moved to Maui?
Yeah. So from the first phone call, April 29th, to the day we were married, July 9th, was exactly 10 weeks, Saturday to Saturday, I think.
When you know, you know.
Yeah. And I knew, and it was like a few times in my life up until that point, I knew. What was sort of unfortunate was the people around me were very worried.
They always are, yeah.
Right. And you know, it was family members, close friends who were like, Sterling says he met this woman. They went on 3 dates, and he says he's going to move to Maui and marry her. This is crazy, right? Like Sterling has lost his mind. That was their opinion.
I love that, though.
It's awesome, right?
Yeah.
But inside, I knew, I was like, I feel conviction, right? I feel like God's hand on this. I prayed for this, and I know that this is all going to work out. So that's July 2022, and I'm living on Maui with my wife. So my wife has 3 children from her previous marriage. At the time, I think they were 8, 10, and 11, or 8, 11, and 12. But now they're 10, 13, and 14. And we knew we wanted to have another child. So immediately after I moved there, my wife got pregnant, and then we had another baby on the way. And so we're living in Kuau in a small plantation home near the beach. And it's lovely and it's wonderful. It's also a very small home, which forced us to become a family very quickly. And I've gone from being a single man to being a married father of 3 with a pregnant wife.
In this 10 months.
Yeah, in a very short span of time. And so it was a really accelerated course in being a husband, being a parent. I was working on Maui and commuting back to Oahu for Housing Hawaii's Future. And then the fires happened in 2023. And of course, housing on Maui became even worse of a crisis than it was before the fires. And so I spent a lot of time in the months after that working with folks in the county government, folks in the state government to try to, you know, find solutions to some of the housing issues that were on Maui. And that's where the start of some of these viral clips go around.
I saw the one when you're talking about like you and your family living on Maui and the rent and stuff like that.
And so that's where, you know, there was a moment of, I guess, mini celebrity that came because I don't think so people are oftentimes hesitant to share things, right? Like how much they're spending in rent. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about, oh, I'm struggling to afford it, right? We talk about it in conversation, but nobody wants to say it publicly, right? And so I was one of the people out in public, like actually saying the numbers.
Yeah.
And my numbers were not like off the averages, you know, that was just the average cost of housing. So when I'm out there saying, yeah, I spend $3,700 a month or $4,000 a month on rent, that's just what it is on Maui. And there was sort of a lot of attention paid to that because I don't think a lot of people had really stopped to think like, well, actually, how would a 32-year-old couple afford a $4,000 a month rent payment, right? Like, how is that actually possible? But the only other option is, well, we could all live in one bedroom, right? Or a studio apartment. But even that's going to be thousands of dollars a month. And there aren't a lot of apartments on Maui. So that's kind of what happened and how I got to Maui.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because that's something I noticed immediately when you came in. We were just talking about living here. And then you just told Jordan how much your rent was. And I was like, wow, like some people are really hesitant about doing that, and you just like.
Well, I work in the house.
Yeah.
I'm in the housing space, right? So I feel like for housing advocates, talking about that is not really a unique thing.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly, what the average rents are, and you know how much people are paying, and you sort of see the numbers. Part of my job, right, was to look at Zillow and to look at Craigslist so that I could speak about the issue intelligently, right? Everything had to be researched and had to be backed up. I didn't want to say, oh, rent is this, but it's actually not that.
Yeah.
But on Maui, especially after the fire, I mean, the rents were crazy. Like 4,000 was almost like the starting point for anything. And then when there was the FEMA program that sort of drove up rents, people were really struggling to find housing. And it wasn't just fire victims. It was everyone on Maui was struggling to find affordable housing because as the prices rose, if your landlord wanted you out so they could get higher rent, or if your landlord sold their house and you need to find a new place, there was no inventory. The costs were super high. And so thousands of people left Maui. I don't know what the exact number is, but at one point I know it was at least like 3,000 or 4,000 people in the year after the fire left Maui. And that's an island of only about 165,000 people. So it was a massive exodus of people. And a huge part of that was there weren't a lot of jobs, especially if you had worked in Lahaina, your job was gone. Rent was super expensive. And Maui's not the kind of place where you can just start a business, because like who are your customers really? And there aren't even a lot of commercial spaces to start a business, right? Like we're in this commercial space. I asked you the rent because I'm thinking about commercial space now. On Maui, there really isn't a lot of commercial space. And so for aspiring business owners, for young people who want to be entrepreneurial, it wasn't really a great place. And so I talked to a lot of people either, before they were leaving, on their way out, or after they'd already left Maui, who were just like, I can't stay here. I can't afford it. It's not good for my family.
So it makes sense now with how knowledgeable you are because you did all the research, writing articles and columns and talking with people working in all these different sectors and then starting the nonprofit, of course. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you today because we're pretty much the same age.
Sure.
You're just like a year and a half older than me, or 2 years older than me. And I'm just like, you have these conversations amongst your friends and family, and we don't really talk about it in public. Like you said, rent and financial struggles and even depression, mental health, all these things, right? It's so, I guess we're ashamed of sharing it. Whether you, you live in a certain place and you're even talking about wages, like how much you make at work and stuff like that. All those things are kind of taboo. And I think it has a lot to do with the culture that we grew up in, where our parents never talked about that. So now we don't talk about it. We don't feel comfortable talking about it. So I want to get into all of that stuff. A lot of it is in the social media questions that people ask. So we're going to take a quick shishi break and we'll be right back.
Kalea Hop Water is a sparkling, hop-infused beverage with bright, tropical flavors and the refreshing essence of island life. With 0 alcohol, 0 carbs, and 0 calories. Kalea brings aloha in every bubble.
All right, we're back from a quick shishi break. Mahalo to our drink sponsor, Kalea Sparkling Hop Water, aloha in every bubble, for providing the best quality shishi in Honolulu and I guess the state. I know they're at KTA in Hilo now. I don't know where else they are, but I'm pretty sure they're in other islands as well. How are you enjoying it? You're on your second can.
Oh, it's awesome. Both the flavors I've had were great.
Yes.
The lychee is awesome.
Lychee is my favorite. Papaya is pretty good too, though. And then the blood orange is what I started with. So I have a little hair in mine. Are you a sparkling water guy? Or are you a regular water guy?
Mostly just water. For drinks, it's matcha lattes all day. And when I say all day, I mean like 3 every day.
So morning, afternoon, noon, and night?
Yep.
But doesn't that keep you up?
No. So usually it's like 5 a.m., 8 a.m., and then like noon.
Oh, you're an early riser. When do you get up every morning?
4:30.
Is that because of you got to take kids to school? Do you work out? Is this work?
So the kids are homeschooled, so it's not that. It's...
you're just crazy.
I'm crazy. No. I find that waking up early is the time that I can best sort of sit down and pray and kind of be with God. As soon as the family wakes up, right, like things get hectic, or you go to work and you start working. At 4:30, when I wake up, I hop right out of bed. My wife and the baby are still asleep. The kids are still asleep. I go to my desk, I pull on the lamp, one light bulb in our apartment is on, I sit there with my Bible, I read a little bit of scripture, I journal, I pray, and then I go down to the Starbucks across the street at Salt, and I sit there for about 3 hours from like 5 to 8 in the morning, just working, either reading or working. And that's my first matcha of the day is that
crazy.
5 to 8.
What time do you go to sleep?
Usually by 9. In an ideal world, I'm asleep by 9.
Dang.
Yeah.
And that's like every day. But so if you, for example, you got events, whatever,
Yeah.
you end up going to sleep at like midnight, do you still get up that early?
Yes. It's rough. So yeah, the other night I actually had to do a call with a guy in Europe. And so the only time he could do was 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. So after we were done at 11 p.m., I was exhausted. I was just wiped out. And I just went to sleep and woke up at 4:30. I used to try to do, on like the weekends, I'd try to wake up a little bit later, but I found it just didn't work because like if I let myself, I'd sleep in like way longer. And like what was the difference in like saving an hour? It just made sense to be like, okay, 4:30 every day. The good news is if you wake up 4:30 every day for long enough, you will be very tired at night. And so as soon as it's time to go to sleep or you're able to go to sleep, you'll just fall right asleep. So I don't have trouble going to sleep at night.
Wow, that's crazy. I can't go to sleep that early. Or, I mean, I don't have a problem waking up, but like if I went to sleep at like 9 or 10 o'clock, I'd wake up at like 1 a.m. or whatever. So I don't know if that's just because of like how I've been. I've talked about how my sleeping schedule is kind of weird. But yeah, how you have that peace in the morning, I have that peace at night.
Okay.
Where like I'm not talking to anybody. Sometimes I'm still working and like sending emails sometimes. But it's just, I'm more of a night owl.
Everyone has the different.
And it's a biological thing. I don't know if you ever read about that, how some people are wired where they're like, if we talk about like back in the days, the primitive days, some people were like the ones that watched the campfire. Some people were the ones that woke up early. And so
I'm the one that wakes up early.
And I'm watching the campfire. I'm watching out.
We got a
over
good
everybody.
balance.
Exactly. All right, so let's get into the social media fan questions. We got some good ones. I'm going to start with this one just because you mentioned your faith and you also mentioned this person before we came on the podcast. This comes from Russ_Kimura. He says, how does faith play into the way you make decisions?
It is the largest part. And Russ is a great friend. So thanks, Russ, for this question. Choosing to marry my wife 3 years ago was probably the highest risk decision I'd ever made in my life. There's no risk in applying to Harvard, right? Because worst case scenario is you don't get in. Choosing to move to a different island, to marry someone, to have a child with them, to raise a family together is, I think, a more
and help raise her children, make them your own.
That's a
totally
bigger risk for everyone involved, right? For me, for her children, and that was really me being on my knees praying for a family was probably the first time in my life that I really turned to God and said, like, I can't do this on my own and I just need help. And he came through, right? Like he came through, he brought me a wife. I took the leap of faith and moved to Maui and married her. And my friends, my family would be like, aren't you worried, right? Like you don't know the kids, you've never met them, right? Like, and all of this stuff. And people are like, oh, isn't there going to be like stepdad issues? You're not my real dad, all of that. None of that happened. Like, yes, there were difficulties and there were challenges, but I do believe that God guided me through all of it. Because of that experience, I've just gotten closer and closer to God, right? And I try my best to consult him, every morning, right? To pray and to talk to him. And I feel like the closer I get, the more I can feel him speaking to me through conversations, through little things that come up through the day, through scripture. And that is the cornerstone of everything I'm doing. So that's the answer, Russ. It's the cornerstone. Faith is like the central, most important thing in every decision that I make.
Oh, that's awesome. Same for me because my girlfriend's name is Faith.
There you go. There you go.
So
yeah.
I told her this question this morning when I was writing it down. I was like, how does faith play into the way I make decisions?
Yeah. She makes the decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I look at her, I say what I'm going to do, I see her face. If it's a bad face, I'm not going to do it. If it's a good face, I'll do it.
Yes. Right after Faith is my wife, right? So it's Faith and then it's my wife. And that's the whole decision-making process.
Yeah. We're almost living parallel lives.
Yep.
Okay, next question comes from, oh, hi, my name is Josh. Shout out to him. This used to be my old neighbor in Hilo. He says, can you ask him if he thinks a non-resident tax for purchasing homes in the state would work?
Yes, this is not yes, but yes, this is a good question, and it is an important question. Here is the basic challenge, and the challenge is the trade-off. So Maui County, for example, changed its real property taxes so that they would charge more for short-term rentals and for non-owner occupied, or essentially, right, second and third homes, right? They did that a few years ago. I think it was 2016, and they've had it for a few years now. It helped them actually generate a fair bit of property taxes while being able to charge residents much less. There's a danger, though, which is they are now dependent on short-term rentals and non-owner occupied property for all of the government services, right? And so what you tax, you end up depending on in the long term, right? So if you tax income, you need workers to pay the income taxes. If you tax real estate, you need real estate to pay the real estate taxes. If you tax investors or people outside of Hawaii, yes, it does bring money in, but at a certain point, you become dependent on it like a drug. And of course, if politicians want to have more money, an easy way to get more money is to have more non-owner occupied investment real estate. So it is one of those policies that can be done in a balanced way, but you just have to be really careful about how you design it, because people's, I think, gut instinct is, yeah, just tax the hell out of it, right? If you do that, yes, it will help with revenue. Yes, local people will pay less in the way of taxes, but at a certain point, you might be dependent on it. There is a counter, right? Which is, let's say you just raise the tax to infinity so that nobody builds anything that's non-owner occupied. And some people want to do that. They say, raise the tax to infinity, and we're never going to build any more high-rise condos in Kakako that a Japanese person buys. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that local people get housing. There is a fair possibility that in that world, one, all of the real estate goes away in terms of the values, but also all the jobs associated with real estate. Hawaii, as a result, has a smaller economy, and some people may want that, but the consequence of that is going to be a lot of people who are unemployed. And a lot of those people who would be unemployed would be local people, Native Hawaiians. So it's just trade-offs. It's a good question, and it's something I think we should consider all kinds of policies to deal with our housing crises. But when we reflexively grab on to like just tax them, to infinity, we know how that plays out. So on Maui, for example, they started taxing short-term rentals at a really high rate a few years ago. After the fire, there was a real push to ban some of these short-term rentals, 7,000 of them. I don't know the exact number, so please don't quote me, but a large percentage of Maui County's tax base would be eliminated if they eliminated those short-term rentals. And so the question is, right, like, okay, does that mean fewer police officers or fewer firefighters or less trash collection, right? Like, where are you going to cut from the budget when you do that? Or are you going to tax local people more to make up for the shortfall? These are the kinds of questions that are hard and not really feel good. It's easy, and I was a housing advocate, and I define an advocate as someone who like has a position and they just want their position, right? And I care about the sea turtles, I care about building housing, whatever it is. It's fun to be an advocate because you don't really have to think about all the trade-offs and how everything is connected. On the other side of the table is somebody in government who does, right? Like a legislator, and we yell at them, peel-outicians, whatever you want to say. But every day, somebody in government has to think about these different trade-offs. And they may want to do something, but they may know that the consequence could be negative maybe 2 or 5 or 10 years from now. And so they can't do that. Everybody's yelling at them today, do it, do it, do it. And that's what makes being in government such a tough job, is having to deal with those trade-offs.
Yeah, and I think us hearing that and learning about the stipulations of, if I do this, then this, and the effects that could happen if this is rushed or it's done ignorantly. So at least for me, I think it helps me understand a little bit more how it works in politics, and just me researching more and talking to other people had given me a lot of sympathy for government officials and stuff like that. For the housing stuff, I think it's always going to be the trickiest thing in Hawaii, especially in our generation. This is probably an unpopular thing to say. How when I hear people are like, oh, well, if another person, non-Hawaiian, is moving into these high-rise or whatever, that's taking a house away from a Hawaiian or a local.
Yep.
My counter, which I understand, is a Hawaiian, a local person like me and you, or anybody listening to this, we can't even afford to buy that place.
Sure.
So to me, I'm just like, right now, my biggest concern isn't like somebody moving into that place, because they're gonna fund the economy because they're living here. I'm like, okay, I don't think these empty houses right over here, somebody moving in there is taking a house away from me or my friends. I don't think that.
Sure.
I think that's just something we're saying. I think the problem is we need to figure out how to make more money, because then that's the real issue.
Yeah.
Is like, okay, if I were able to afford it, and they're paying, I don't know, maybe just like $50,000 over the asking limit, they're taking that house that I would have bought because I put an offer in for that.
Yes.
But we don't even have enough money to put it in an offer.
Yes.
So that's my thing, is like, how do we get wages to increase? And I'm pretty sure there's a question here. So let me.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that, though.
Okay.
I used to fly back from Maui to Oahu, and on one of my first flights back to Oahu from Maui, I was sitting next to this young man from Molokai. I think he was a junior in high school. And as we approached Honolulu, he looked out the window and he said, "Concrete jungle."
Yeah.
They live like rats down there. And I will never forget that, because, of course, he thinks I'm coming from Maui because I'm like, oh, I'm flying to Oahu for work. But actually, I grew up in the concrete jungle. I lived like a rat down there.
Yeah.
And I think about high-rise condos, right? So Kaka'ako is sort of infamous. People are like, there are no lights on at night. It's all foreign speculators. There's no locals that live there. One, that's not true. I live there. And
I live here.
I have neighbors that live there who work in all sorts of diverse professions, right? People that work in healthcare, people that work in business, people that work in nonprofits who live in my building or live in the building next to mine. Two, like, what was there before? So let's assume that like 80% of the units in the building that I live in are owned by Japanese people or Brazilians or Chinese people, and only 20% are owned by local. It used to be a CompUSA.
What do you mean by that?
The building, before the building, there was just a CompUSA there.
Oh, is that a business?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that
sorry.
was.
The old computer store, right?
Oh, okay.
So like, it was like Best Buy before Best Buy.
Oh, okay.
It went out of business. That's why it's not there. So we look at this condo, and I talk to people all the time who are like, oh my God, they built all those condos, right? Like, I'm like, the condos replaced Pier 1, right? The condos replaced CompUSA. Nobody was protesting when CompUSA closed. Like, please don't close CompUSA. Nobody loved CompUSA. Now there are hundreds of people that live there, including me and my neighbors. I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. Would it be great if instead of there being 80% units that are occupied by people who are just here part of the year? For sure. Would it be great if it were all local families, all working families? Yes, I would much prefer that. But we have to be careful about the comparison, right? The comparison is not like that building versus another building. The comparison is that building versus the CompUSA that was there. And nobody misses the CompUSA. Most people don't even remember it being a CompUSA. So yeah, I agree with you.
Dang, that's a really good point. I never looked at it like that. The only one I'm disappointed in is the one going up on Ohanahale Marketplace.
Yes.
Because I love that place. I love going to Ohanahale, going to all those little vendors. They had pop-ups over there. That's the only one I'm disappointed. I am going to miss that place.
Yep.
But when you put it into the CompUSA perspective, or like, I don't want to say where I live, but places around here, like it's just like a restaurant or a business, and they're just replacing that or putting a building on these not residential spots over like
all the
these
commercial
commercial properties. Yeah. I guess I guess our biggest gripe is that there's not enough locals. Because even in my building, every
Yes.
time I see a
Yes.
local, it's like somebody working there, or
Yep.
once in a while, a realtor showing some other people not from the spot. And every time I meet somebody local, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, right?
Yes.
Or it's literally like going out in the continent and seeing somebody wear a Hawaii shirt, and you're like, "Hey, you're from Hawaii."
Yeah.
That's how it feels like seeing another local in our buildings and where we're living.
Yep.
And I think it's just we're complaining because there's not enough locals, and there's not enough locals because locals don't make enough money.
Yes. No, and that's right. So if housing prices went to infinity, it would be fine as long as wages went to infinity.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is housing prices have gone to infinity and wages are still the same that they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And part of that is just the structure of Hawaii's economy, lots of service industry, tourism, hospitality, where wages typically don't track along with inflation. And part of it is an increase in people moving here whose incomes do track along with inflation. I always think about there are two types of professions that track inflation and professions that don't. And people in those two paths live totally different lives. So like real estate obviously tracks inflation. Usually lawyers increase their wages with inflation. Healthcare, a lot of times, for doctors, right, their wages go up. But for sort of low wage service jobs, they don't keep pace with inflation. And so every year they're struggling more and more to afford housing, to afford groceries. And these are like structural big economic problems that we have to resolve. And they're not just Hawaii problems, they're United States problems, but these are just problems that countries face with inflation. And I think it's almost like a misplaced anger, right? Where like we could go and we could yell at Howard Hughes and be like, stop building condos. But that's not going to fix inflation, right? That's not going to fix these bigger, broader political issues that do require our attention and we should be trying to resolve so that people aren't struggling.
Yeah, and that's my thing too, is I'm not somebody who wants to complain at the circumstances. Taxes is going to be taxes. Inflation is going to be inflation. The win is going to be the win, right? What was it saying? You can't change the win. You can only adjust the sales. I'm somebody who adjusts the sales.
Yep.
So if, our wages aren't, or we don't have positions that can pay enough, create a position that pay enough. And of course, all of this is way easier said than done.
Sure.
It's hard to live in Hawaii. Cost of living is so expensive. Wainani with two I's at the end says, how to fix the problem of low wages in Hawaii.
How long do we have?
As long as you want.
So we'll take a historical detour. If we go back to plantation times, there was a really strong labor movement. The ILWU represented plantation workers, and occasionally they would have to strike for higher wages. That worked in a situation where there was one industry, essentially. But now there are many industries, and we don't have the same kind of labor organizing that we did 50, 60 years ago. People just don't join labor unions in the same way. They don't participate. They don't participate politically in the same way. Around the turning of Hawaii into a state in 1959, there was a huge movement within the Democratic Party of Hawaii. A lot of it driven by disaffected Japanese people who came back from the war and felt like they were marginalized and shut out. And so they got organized, both Japanese Americans, labor folks, all coming together through the Democratic Party to try to create change to make things more equal. And their enemy was sort of like the Big Five and some of the established businesses that were racist against all kinds of people. If you look at those two movements, right, they're mass movements trying to push for more equality, trying to push for higher wages in a lot of cases, but more opportunities. Japanese Americans were denied from a lot of business opportunities. They weren't allowed to work at companies. They were totally discriminated against. They got organized and they fought. So I use those to illustrate that everything in terms of social change comes from people getting educated and organized and having clear goals of what they want to achieve politically. You have to have a vision of where you're trying to go. So to answer Wainani's question, how do we increase wages? So one way in an industry, right, would just be to use traditional labor organizing tactics to try to demand higher wages. And you see this in healthcare, right? Nurses striking and fighting for higher wages. At a systemic level, though, it's not just wages, it's also taxes and government regulation, right? So a wage job oftentimes will always have less opportunity than an entrepreneurial job, right? It's just the nature of the world. Being a business owner gives you more upside than being an employee. In Hawaii, we make it really hard for people to start businesses. Everything from registering businesses, the regulations, professional licensure, all the way to the general excise tax and the way that we tax income at high rates and general excise and all of that. If you couple that together, you have a climate where people don't really start their own businesses and they just end up in these wage jobs. So to some extent, for the wage jobs, you have to fight and organize. But a really important thing is, like you said, Kamako, we should be encouraging people to get into entrepreneurship. We should be teaching people the skills they need to build businesses. We should be helping them to identify problems that they can actually solve with a business, because there are tons of problems that can be solved with businesses. I wasn't taught that in high school, right? In high school, it was you go to a college and then you could be like a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or, right? Like all of these professions end with right? But not entrepreneur. That wasn't one of the things back then when we were in school in like the early 2000s. Nowadays, there is startup classes, education on entrepreneurship in the school system, where it just wasn't a thing back then. Starting your own business was not something you heard about unless your parents talked about it or you knew somebody who knew somebody. I think that's where the internet has really changed things, because let's say you do grow up in a house where your parents are just like, be a lawyer, be a doctor. If you go on YouTube, you can learn all about entrepreneurship. You can watch Alex Hormozy or any of these other people, and you can find books online and you can read about all of these things and learn things that you just are not exposed to in your narrow circle of friends.
Yeah, you mentioned Alex. That's Jordan's guy. I think he did what is it, like a workshop or something with an Alex Hormozy stuff. I don't know if he can hear us, but yeah, we'll go ask him after. But totally, I think that's, especially after me listening to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it just kind of reaffirmed my mindset of, you need to do something other than what you're doing if you want to make more money and sustain living here.
Well, and that's the hard thing in terms of exposure, right? Where, so when I grew up, my mom didn't really talk about money. And when we saw something that was expensive, she'd be like, that's expensive. And I would think, oh, that's expensive. And what expensive meant was, that's not for me, right? Like that was the subtext of that's expensive. And sometimes we'll be walking around and she'll still say stuff like that, right? Or she'll be like, that's expensive. And I'm like relatively to what, right? Like spending $30 on lunch, if you only have $20, is expensive. But if you can afford it, why not, right? Like, why wouldn't you do that? A lot of times I think we're trapped in the expectations and the beliefs of the people around us, starting with our family, maybe our friends, and all of our ambitions for the future are defined by what they think is acceptable. So living in a van and surfing every day in Hawaii is a very common goal. And yet, if you think about it, why? Why is that a thing, right? Having a lifted Toyota is like, that's a gold chain. That's like the vision of where we go. The metaphor I love to use is of a Rube Goldberg machine, right? So you've seen these machines, right, where you make the ball move and it goes down the chute and it hits the dominoes, and then the dominoes hit something that swings, and then it goes in this crazy way. If you think about our culture is a Rube Goldberg machine. And what pulls people down is the gravity, which is usually the desire for status, right? So if you're a young man in Hawaii, you want to be top dog. And maybe top dog means joining the football team and, being ripped and talking like a moke and scrapping.
With your lifted Yoda.
Right, with your lifted Yoda. Or maybe you're like slightly nerdier and being top dog means joining the robotics team and applying to Stanford and studying medicine or something like that. But a lot of times you see people, they just follow whatever that path is, and they're being driven by this desire, right? When I saw Itai and Alakai and they were writing poetry, and I knew that they were awesome, I wanted to be like them. I just felt this sense. I want to be cool like them. And being cool like them meant doing poetry. When I was doing debate and I'm sitting next to Bo Seo and Fanele Mashwama at Harvard and they're about to win the world championship, I was like, I want to be cool like them. And that meant doing debate, right? Like when I want to be a business owner and run my own business, I look at somebody like Alex Hormozy and I say, that's cool. I want to be like him. So if you look at culture as that Rube Goldberg machine, you just have to figure out, well, where are people going? And is that the best machine, right? Because people will go wherever they're drawn. And I think a lot of times we assume in Hawaii we don't have talent. I don't think that's true. I think we have just as much talent as anywhere else. The problem is the talent goes off on this weird Rube Goldberg shoot that leads to lifted Yodas and gold chains and like smoking vapes and whatever it is. And like very few people go down the path of like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and start my own business and be financially responsible and own real estate and do all of that stuff. And so I think for me, inflection points in life are just where you're at like an intersection of two paths for the Rube Goldberg machine. And you were going down this path and now all of a sudden you're going down the other path.
Yep. And this is why the way I think is that it's not that we don't have talent here. We don't have direction. And that's why we end up going on the different paths. Because in my life, I've had to find my own direction. But when I got to the point where I started to get into entrepreneurship and business, I knew nothing about that.
Yes.
I stumbled upon doing entrepreneurship and running my own business when I didn't even know I was running my own business, paying off my student loans and doing all the logistic, the scheduling, the actual work and all these things. And they're like, you're running a business. And then meeting mentors and talking to other people, realizing that like people make more than like $4,000 a month. And then, following that path and without direction, we'd be so lost. And that goes beyond just, financially. So I think that's the biggest issue here is that, and I constantly, meet people who are doing like crazy things in this world. Like I'm working with my friend Daniel and he's working on this tech and this AI stuff. This guy, this Korean guy from California, he lives in Hawaii now and we've been friends for about 5 years. And he's showing me all these things and he's so passionate about helping people in Hawaii, people like me. And that's what we need because we have the talent. We have the uncultivated talent and we just need somebody to like help us and give us those resources sometimes. And I think it's, people like Daniel and, I'm sure you have mentors just like, just people you look up to. You need those people to give you that direction so that you can go down this road and afford to.
Mentorship. There are certain people who can just change the course of your life by showing you that something is possible, right? So when Colbert took me to the Hawaii Executive Conference and put me in front of 150 CEOs and they all listened and then they all stood up and gave me a standing ovation, I was like, wait a second. I could have ideas in my head and write them and speak them. And the CEOs of some of the largest companies, right, could think, wow, that's a good idea. Now I've changed my mind about something, completely changed my idea of what was possible. Obviously, stuff like going to Harvard, these things give people confidence that they can actually do more and be more. And so when I look at young people, when I was teaching university students, you sort of think, what can you do? What can you pour into this young person to show them a path that's different than the one that they're on? Or at least even just to make them aware that they're on a path, right? I think everyone is on a path. Everyone's being pulled down by gravity and they're following the chute and they're knocking over dominoes. Do they even know that path? And do they want to go where it leads, right? You meet people sometimes who they did everything right? They studied hard, they got straight A's, they went to a good school, they came back, they became a lawyer, and now they're an alcoholic and they're Marriage is not so good. They don't have time to spend with their kids. They're not happy. They're making good money and they can send their kids to Iolani or Punahou. So they have these golden handcuffs. They hate their job, right? They're alcoholic and yet they can't escape, right? And part of they can't escape is a fear. And part of they can't escape is they've been on this path so long that they can't even see that there's another path that could lead them to more time with their wife or more time with their kids. And that's, I think, for me, the saddest thing. One, I don't want to be in that position. But two, for my children or for people I mentor, I don't want them to ever get trapped where they feel like this is the only way. I've been lucky in my adult life to change directions a few times. You know, I was going to run an arts nonprofit. Then I was going to teach university. Then I was running a housing advocacy nonprofit. Now I'm building a business. And each thing is totally different than the other. But what I know is if I apply myself for 5 years and really work at something, I could get really good at it. And it doesn't matter what that is. And so now I know it's like I get to choose, right? Whatever I want to do for the next 5 years, just like you've been working on this podcast, right? You've gotten really good at it just by putting in the reps. You can choose something and do it for 5 years and you'll suck the first 2 years. I sucked at debate. I was bad. By year 5, I was really good. And it was just consistency and discipline.
Yeah, totally. And I think having that goal or knowing that what you see in your mind is possible through somebody else's action too is really important because there's like a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
If I keep working like this, I could end up like this person.
Yes.
And my mindset has changed so much in the last couple of years. As soon as I started, before, I wasn't making money doing any of this. Once I started to make money doing all of this, my mindset changed. Like, whoa, I can get paid for this. That wasn't the idea, was to get paid for this. But I'm just like, oh wow, I can leverage all these analytics. I can get sponsors. I can do this. Now I can afford this. Now I'm never working $20 an hour ever again. And my friend Daniel, we had this meeting with somebody last week, and he was saying, telling them, once you make your first million, you don't ever not make $1 million after that because you know how to do that and you never go backwards.
Yes.
So you have this knowledge. So when you're talking about that $30, that's expensive. Or your mom's saying that's expensive. My older brother's like that. He's like, oh, your rent is so expensive. You sure you want to do that? You sure you want to do this? Can you afford this? I'm like, I'll make more money. That's how my mind, when I don't see things and I'm just like, I can't afford that. I say, oh, I just need to make more money.
Yes.
I'm not thinking, oh, I got to save more, which, obviously you should save.
Yep.
But my mindset is like, oh, I'll just make more money.
Well, and we don't, I think a lot of times, and well-meaning people give advice to young people that really stunts their growth, right? So I'll give you an example. My rent is expensive. I live in Kaka'ako. My wife and I are not saving much for retirement right now.
Same.
And that's fine.
Hey, high five.
But part of it is in deciding where we wanted to live on Oahu, I was like, one, I'm building a business. So I want to be near downtown because a lot of my meetings are going to be with business people. I want to live in a place where I never need to get into a car because I don't want to lose 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours every day driving around. And so we live right in the center of Kaka'ako. I can walk to pretty much all of my meetings, which gets me my exercise and my commute at the same time. Everything is there. All of the business opportunities are there. So I'm paying more now, but it's because I'm investing in building a business, right? And being in the city is really helpful if you're trying to build a business because when I was on Maui, I mean, how many meetings can you have in a day on Maui, right? Like if you're driving 45 minutes from meeting to meeting, how many meetings can you have in a day on Oahu? It's a ton more. And levels up, right? If you go to New York City or to Tokyo or to any larger city, there's just more opportunity. So people say, well, why would somebody want to live in a city? Why would somebody want to live in an expensive building? Why would somebody pay somebody to do their grocery shopping for them? Why would somebody pay to do meal prep? That's expensive. And we just realized that it's fundamentally different choices about what's important, right? And I think more than anything else, these mindsets are things that I didn't get taught as a kid. I had to learn it on the internet, right? I had to learn it from reading books. I didn't learn it at home with my family. And it's sad because if you think about it, there are people who do have talent, drive, and ambition and could do amazing things. But if they never even know it's possible, they're going to get stuck doing what all their friends were doing. My friends from high school, a lot of what they did for fun was just drink and smoke and go to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And unsurprisingly, I didn't really do the smoking, but I did a fair bit of the drinking and going to the beach. And then after high school, when I started hanging around the poetry folks, some of them smoked, but they didn't really drink too much and they didn't really go to the beach. And so I stopped really going to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And now at this point, none of my friends really surf and I don't surf. Right? So we're influenced by the people we're around. We're influenced by our role models. And they have a larger impact than I think we can know, right? Our reference group or who we're looking up to.
Yeah. And I think people see us, some people's lives, like they see the freedom that, you know, like for example, for me, a constant joke that I get from like friends or even family, like, oh yeah, you don't have a real job, you know, you have so much free time. Because like even I'm the commissioner of one of my fantasy football leagues, and I'll text people like all the stuff. I'm super on it. But I'm a busy person. I got other things to do. And like I'll respond so fast and they're like, how do you even do all of this? Like somebody say, oh, because he doesn't have a job. I'm like, oh, it's because, you know, I don't work a 9 to 5. I work in the morning if I need to. I work at night if I need to. I work on the weekends if I need to. I'm not going to the district or all these clubs or the bars every pauhana, every Saturday night. I'm working or like doing stuff that is pushing my business, my self forward. And I don't think a lot of people have that mindset.
You see the choices people make, and the choices determine a lot of the outcomes in their life, right? So, you know, you're not out partying every night. I always say pretty much every bad decision people make is made between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m.
That's why you sleep at 9 p.m.
That's why I sleep at 9 p.m. But think about it. I mean, like actually think about it.
Totally.
Right? So when does drunk driving happen? It happens at night pretty much. When does domestic violence happen? It happens at night. When do people say things in their relationships that they really regret? Right? It's usually there's drugs involved or they're drunk. It's late at night, so they're tired, you know. And that's when mistakes happen. Mistakes that could be minor, but mistakes when somebody goes drunk driving that actually end lives. If you just sleep between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., you'll avoid 80% of the mistakes you can make. But that's just, it's just a choice, right? No one ever framed it for me like that. So when I would teach university students, I'd like kind of blow their minds with that. I'd be like, how many bad decisions can you make when the sun is up? And it's like, not many, you know? All the bad decisions happen when the sun is down. So just go hide when the sun is down and don't make those decisions.
I agree. Yeah. And that's why I drink Kolea sparkling hot water, 0 alcohol.
Right on. This is a good sponsor for this episode.
Exactly. Okay. I want to move on to the next question, but yeah, that's something we could talk about forever. Let's get to something a little bit more fun from Stinton_Eric. This person says, who is the greatest Hawaii MC of all time?
Oh, this is tough. I am very fond of 3 rappers who I will not rank because they're all friends. I really love Omega 6, who's on Instagram as the Black Japanther. I really love Jonah, Big Mox, who, you know, was also...
We just had Chris Styles on.
There you go. Also a singer, member of Angry Locals, and then Aloha Mahoney.
K-Love. Yeah.
Those are the big 3 for me. When I was coming up in the sort of rap scene, I would listen to them. Or Big Mox and K-Love would rap at Jazz Minds, and we'd have ciphers outside of their shows when they were rapping as prolific unknowns. And those moments for me, watching their creativity, their rapping, are super inspirational. So those are my big 3.
Did you ever want to be a rapper?
I rapped
saw
for a little bit,
videos on YouTube.
I did. So I made a couple of like EPs with a producer named Scott Otoro, who runs a small indie record label called Zenbu Records, and did a couple of releases. It was always fun for me. Again, right? Just like bodyboarding. I knew I wasn't going to be a pro bodyboarder. I know I'm not going to be a pro rapper. I definitely enjoyed it though. I really loved structuring things with rhymes and performing. Again, I don't do it at all anymore. But for a time, it was a really fun chapter.
That's cool. And that's cool that you say that, because a lot of people start something thinking that they have to be the best or there has to be some sort of like huge goal that needs to be accomplished. You can just do it because you enjoy it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, everything I've done in my life has just been following my interests, right?
Same. Yeah.
Right. So this is like it's a passion project. It's following your interests. You choose the guests that you're interested in having conversations with, and then magically everything works out from that. I had a lot of fun rapping. I met a lot of cool people who I still keep in touch with to this day. You know, if I see Big Mox, you know, I get to hang out. Omega 6 featured on one of my tracks. Big Mox featured on one of my tracks. Creed Chameleon featured on one of my tracks. These were huge moments for me as a you know, young rap aficionado, getting to collaborate with people I listened to in like high school. I remember listening to Creed Chameleon had a song called White Flag when I was like a senior in high school. It was one of the first underground hip hop songs I'd ever heard in Hawaii. And then, you know, fast forward 6 or 7 years and he's on one of my tracks.
So cool.
That's a cool thing, right?
So cool.
And so I'm not the best rapper, but I got to rap with people I looked up to growing up, and that was fun.
What was your rapper name?
It was Sans, S-A-N-S, which does sound like sands, like the beach, and is sort of that without. And so it is like I don't know. I thought it was profound at the time.
Oh, okay. What ethnicities are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm half Caucasian and then 3/8 Japanese and 1/8 Okinawan.
Oh, okay, cool. I just keep thinking if you're Portuguese, you'd be Sterling Silva.
Yeah.
Has
That's a good joke.
has
I have
anybody
gotten
ever
that joke.
said that?
Yep.
I kept thinking that.
So that joke, and then because my birthday was April 1st, is today a special day for you? Must not be. And then people be like, just kidding, happy birthday, April Fools. The Sterling Silva joke and the April Fools joke, like my whole school career, right? Like you meet somebody new and then here comes the joke, right?
Well, I'm happy I got to get in on
No,
the
it's
action.
good. It's
Yeah,
good.
Thank you.
It's good.
Thank you for letting me. Okay. Next question comes from Koa Cassidy. This person says, if Jesus was made in God's image, was Sterling Higa made in ChatGPT's image?
Koa's trolling me.
It's a great question.
Maybe. Okay, so I think Koa's point, Koa's a friend, is I take in a lot of information. So I think more than most people, I could wake up at 4:30 and from 5 a.m. till 5 p.m. or from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m., I could just consume information. So I can have hours and hours of conversations. I can read books. I can listen to audiobooks. And my appetite sort of never runs out. So like since high school, it's been 16 years. I've read about 1,000 books. That's like 62 books a year, every year. But it's not 62 books a year because the first year I only read 16. And in the last 8 months, I've read like 120. So the pace has just sort of increased with time because I just love hoovering up information. So to your point about like people may see the result, but they don't see what goes into it. Like, yeah, I'm pretty good with words. Part of that is I spend my whole day around words, right? Yeah, I'm good with words. I spent 6 years doing poetry at the highest level and then 5 years doing debate, first at the lowest level and then at the highest level. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of hours in front of classrooms speaking and teaching public speaking. So I should be good at it, right? Like you should be good at anything you do for 15 years while trying to reflect and improve. And I think when I teach public speaking classes, I have to remind the students of that. I'm like, your goal shouldn't to be, your goal doesn't need to be me, right? Like I'm also not a perfect model of public speaking. Your goal should be every day, can you get a little bit better? And if you were to start today and do that for 15 years, you'd probably be better than me because I wasn't doing that the whole 15 years. The first 2 years doing debate, I was just losing and not getting any better, right? Like I wasted a lot of time because I didn't know what I was doing. And my hope for younger generations is they don't lose that time. They know what they're doing. They know that they're trying to get better at things.
And also learning from failure. Because you don't learn that much from success.
Oh, 100%.
You learn all from failure.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question comes from Dwell_Hawaii. True or false? Sterling believes cardiologists are more valuable than realtors or podcasters.
This is a trolling question. So I made a statement in another interview where I said that cardiologists were really valuable. And some people in the comments took offense because they were like, well, what about what about just the cashier at 7-Eleven? Are they valuable? I was not saying, right, that on a human level, somebody's job makes them more valuable than another human. I'm a Christian, and so I literally cannot believe that. That is not a Christian idea. However, if I have a heart attack, I would much rather have the cardiologist. And so the question is, are there certain forms of work that contribute more value to the world? And I think the answer has to be yes.
100% yes.
But people draw the wrong conclusion from that. It doesn't mean that we devalue and say that somebody is worthless if they don't have one of those jobs. And I also don't think that just because somebody works a menial job that they should be poor, right? I think they should have a good standard of living. But we do have to think about the Rube Goldberg machine. I believe certain people are more capable than other people, right? So just to take a basic example, physical ability. If somebody doesn't have legs, there are things they will not be able to do in the same way that someone with legs is able to do. There are certain jobs that they couldn't do, right? You can't be a firefighter if you don't have legs. It doesn't mean you're not valuable. It just means you can't do that job. With people who have certain forms of ability, we should try to channel them to the places where they could contribute the most, right? Like somewhere in Hawaii, there's a young kid who's growing up in the projects who has a brilliant entrepreneurial business mind. And if he finds his way and finds a mentor in entrepreneurship, he will become a great business person and contribute to his community. If, on the other hand, he finds a drug dealer, he will become a drug dealer and contribute to destroying his community. And those two paths, one of them, I think, is more valuable than the other, but the person there just had different abilities, and the pathway they took to the end was different. So, yes, I think in some situations, like me having a heart attack, a cardiologist is more valuable than a podcaster. But right now, I'm not having a heart attack, so the podcaster is more valuable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I got a couple of things to say to that. For the example of, somebody not being in the right environment, obviously, you don't blame the kid. You don't blame the seed. You blame the soil.
Yes.
Right? You change it. You have to, same with, people going to school. They're taking all these classes that they don't like. Then they go to college. They find a class that they love. And now they're good at education. It's just the same, the same type of avenue. The other thing was, what were you talking about? What was the question? Cardiologists more valuable. I also agree with you. I always take a step back and think of a zombie apocalypse. I've always talked about zombie apocalypse on the podcast because that'll be the best way for the world to end, because I'm ready. I watched so much Walking Dead, all the spinoffs. I'm ready. If the world was ending, I would not want a podcaster on my team.
Yes.
Straight up, I would luckily I have other skills. I own nunchucks, so hopefully somebody will want me on their team.
Yep.
But, the people that make the world go round, yes, this is entertainment. Yes, this is education as a podcaster, as an entrepreneur. We have skills that we can take away from that, like problem solving, communication. But if we're talking about valuable, plumber, electricians, the trade, a mechanic. Those are the people I think are valuable and are real contributing members of this society.
Yeah. So I always think of two types of jobs, and during the pandemic, this became obvious. There are laptop jobs, right? And that's somebody who could just do their job from a laptop. And then there are what I call real jobs, where somebody has to go somewhere and actually do something. And I think in almost all situations, if you had to choose a team for the zombie apocalypse, you want the people who do real jobs. Because the laptop person is great on the laptop and they're great with a spreadsheet, but a spreadsheet is not real life, right? It's all abstraction. And so I understand there are probably people who wouldn't want me on their team, right? Because it doesn't matter how many books I've read in the zombie apocalypse if I can't fight, or I don't know how to get food, right? Or I don't know how to clean water. No, none of that's going to matter. And so that's where, one, I don't over-ascribe any value to what I do, right? And part of this, there's this great book, I think it's called The Tyranny of Meritocracy by Michael Sandel. And he wrote this whole book about the problem with meritocracy, right? This idea that, if I work hard, I deserve what I get, is there's a lot of blessings and luck that go with that, right? So one of the the blessings I have is I live in a society where being well-spoken is valued. But that's not actually every society. Throughout history, even on the world today, not every society equally values reading, writing, and speaking. There are some societies that would value fishing or hunting. And if I were to go into that society, I would be useless and shunned, right? And rightfully so. I am blessed that I had a certain skill set and I lived in a certain world and I had a certain set of experiences and mentors who helped me get to the position that I'm in now. So I don't ever, or I try not to, right? I try not to say I deserve this, because I deserve this is like, yes, you may have worked hard, but you had the capacity for hard work, right? Like I don't have a debilitating chronic illness where I can't stay awake during the day. I don't have deformities or something that prevented me from working. I can wake up at 5 a.m. and go to bed at 9 p.m. and spend the whole of that time learning without, I enjoy it actually, right? And that's a blessing. And so I think, at the same time that we have to reward people who work hard, there's a certain humility that I think religion instills, especially Christianity, that says, actually, you didn't earn any of those blessings, right? Like God gave you all of that, right? Like all of the money, all of the fame, all of the accolades, all happened because of God. The best example of this is someone like Steph Curry, right? Okay, like greatest shooter of all time, no debate. He gives credit to God, right? Like when he makes shots, he's pointing up to God. When he wins championships, he's giving credit to God because one, he's born in an NBA family, right? His dad plays in the NBA. Two, he's really good and he has mentors who support him all the way. And three, he just happens to be on a team where his ankle injuries don't end his career in the first few years before he becomes the greatest shooter of all time, right? You imagine if his ankle rolls a little bit further in his like second year in the league, he doesn't become Steph Curry. He becomes like D Rose or somebody, right?
Or Seth Curry.
Or Seth Curry. There you go. And then we're not talking about him right now. But in an ideal world, even someone as successful as Steph Curry would be pointing up and being like, actually, God, right? Like, yes, I worked hard. Steph Curry is in the gym, right? Every day. He's putting up shots. He's doing the weightlifting. But God set him up for all of those opportunities.
Yeah. I love the way you look at that. The last thing I wanted to say on what you said earlier too is that how you say you got some, I don't know, comments about what you said about that.
Sure.
Is social media stupid.
Oh, it's toxic.
Oh my God. It's so stupid. It's just like you say you like the rain. They'll be like, oh, he hates sun. That's how social media works.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I always have to tell people, don't hear what we're not saying.
Sure.
Just because you're saying cardiologists are valuable, you're not saying that all the other jobs aren't valuable.
Yeah.
And that's just how some people interpret it.
Yep.
And that's just, I don't even want to talk anymore about those people. But yeah, I was just saying that because it happens all the time with social media. Even in these clips that we're probably going to post, probably going to say something and people are going to be like, oh, well, what about this? Oh, well, what about
That's
that?
good, though. I hear it's good for engagement.
It's good. I just love that people are talking about it.
Yes.
Okay. Last question from Instagram comes from Brad Starks 001. This person says, please describe in detail what modern sustainability looks like and how we should approach it.
So words like sustainability get thrown around a lot. And it's always worthwhile to sort of define, like, well, what do we mean by that? So some people, when they say sustainability, mean, I think humans are a cancer, and if all humans died, we'd be better off because the earth would regrow and all of that. And that's sustainability for them. Other people, when they say sustainability, mean, recycling this can, and that's sustainability. So it's a word that doesn't really mean anything. I think in an ideal world, what people are pointing to is the idea that entropy, right? Like things progress toward chaos and disorder over time, and you would want to ideally avoid that, I think. That's sustainable, right? If maintaining this building so it doesn't fall apart is sustainable. Two, it means not destroying the environment. So obviously pollution For the ocean, if you kill a reef, it's really hard to regrow a reef. If you clear cut a forest, it's really hard to regrow a forest. Avoiding the destruction of the environment, I think that's a good thing. For Hawaii, though, the sustainability is often, I think, framed in the language of people, right? So for Native Hawaiians, for local families that are struggling to be here, sustainability is, can I afford to stay here? Can my children afford to stay here? Can I afford to put food on the table or gas in the car or pay for this medical bill? And those are the struggles that people are facing every day in sustainability. The problem, of course, is when we talk about sustainability, let's say somebody talks about environmental sustainability, they're like, save the sea turtles, save the reef. The guy who's trying to save money to buy eggs, right? Or save money to pay this medical bill so the debt collectors will stop calling him, usually doesn't care about the reef or doesn't care about recycling this can. And oftentimes I think advocates, and I was one, right? Let's say an environmental advocate would look down at that person and say, oh, you don't care about the environment. And it's like, well, I do care about the environment, but I have to care about other things first, right? So to answer Brad's question, for me, it's like, let's put first things first when we talk about sustainability. So one, I don't think we mean when we say sustainability, we have wind turbines and solar farms and geothermal energy, and the only people around who enjoy that are Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah and Jeff Bezos. That's not what we mean when we say sustainability, right? But that would be 100% renewable energy sustainability. I don't think we mean we're going to restore the lo'i and grow kalo and grow sweet potato and grow breadfruit, but the only people who will be able to eat that are Chinese billionaires who live in Kaka'ako and go to Merriman's and get farm to table, right? I don't think we mean sustainability when we say that. So I would put first, before we talk about environmental sustainability, how do we make sure that people who grow up here and love Hawaii and care about it can actually afford to stay here? And that's a huge thing, right? Housing was part of it. I spent 4 years sort of beating on that drum, but it's also giving people real opportunities in terms of jobs and earning and entrepreneurship. It's also making sure that there are communities that they want to be a part of, because look, my wife wanted to move to Oahu because she was tired of living on Maui. We went to Tokyo as a family. We went to Japan. We took all the kids. My mom went with us. My mom just retired. We went there for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, my wife turns to me and says, I really love being in a city. She's like, I haven't gotten in a car in 2 weeks. If I need to get something, I just walk to the grocery store. It's super convenient with the baby. We just walk to a park. On Maui, that's literally impossible where we lived, right? Like, it's a 15-minute drive to the park. And if you wanted to walk, the nearest thing you can walk is along the side of an unprotected highway 30 minutes just to get to a coffee shop, the Jaws Country Store, right? People do want that. Not everyone. The kid on the plane who said that Honolulu was a concrete jungle and they live like rats down there probably doesn't want to live in Kaka'ako, and that's okay. But I know at least one person from Maui who did want to live in Kaka'ako, my wife. I lived in Nu'uanu. I lived in a 4-story walk-up. I like living in a bigger building now. It's great. I love being able to walk around. So part of sustainability is fixing the economic issues, fixing the environmental issues. But culturally, you want to create a culture where people feel like they have a future here. And one of my biggest fears is for more entrepreneurial, ambitious people, the sentiment I hear from people is, I don't feel like Hawaii is for me, right? Because if I join a business, they don't really want to change. They don't really want to innovate. They don't want to use AI, right? Like, why wouldn't I go somewhere where I'm more appreciated, where I'm more encouraged? And my greatest fear is you take all of those people who do have talent, who do have energy that could contribute to making Hawaii better. You hollow out Hawaii, they leave. And then we have these huge problems that we need to solve. And all of the people who could have helped solve those problems are gone. And the only people here are retired Chinese billionaires or Zuckerberg or Oprah or Bezos. And they're all good and they have renewable energy and they're eating kalo chips. And there are lots of poor people struggling with housing, with homelessness, with crime, with all of these issues. So sustainability, that's the whole answer.
That was a very good answer. You are very smart. if there was a zombie apocalypse, I will still have you on my team.
Thank you.
Because
Thank
we
you.
need
I need
brains.
somebody.
We need brains like that. I also gotta say I'll have a farmer on or a gardener or something like that, because people are gonna hear the plumber, electrician, whatever I said, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, what about farmers?" So
Yeah,
I said farmers. That's you nailed it with that answer. Definitely gonna have to share that one on social media so that people can really think about that one. That was good. Last question comes from my stepdad. He texted me right before the podcast started asking like, "Oh, I hope it wasn't too late because I want to tell him this." He says he wants me to let you know that he was in the same program as you,
okay.
but different cohorts. And he says he's a great speaker and passionate for housing for your generation. He's creating new paradigms for how we look at housing here in Hawaii. His question is, have you considered running for office, either in Maui County, Council, State Legislature, or Congress? Well, my stepdad worked for a kaka in D.C. for many years, and then he also works for housing on the Big Island.
Sure.
So he's somebody that is looking forward to this answer from you.
Well, that's very kind of your stepdad to say those things. Anyone, anywhere who is well-spoken and cares about civic issues will at some point be encouraged to run for office. And that's it, right? So yes, I have been encouraged to run for office both while I was living in Maui, now living on Oahu, pretty much continuously for the last 10 years, right? Like people are like, you should run for office, you should run for this, you should run for that. Oftentimes I have to sort of like tell them like slow your roll a little bit. And the slow your roll part is like, yeah, I am pretty good at speaking and I am pretty good at writing. Does that mean I should be trusted to make very consequential decisions? I don't know, right? Somebody can be very good at speaking, very good at writing, and yet possess no wisdom, right? And I think of wisdom as the ability to understand the consequences of actions and to have a sort of deep view of history and what the future could contain. I think of myself as someone in search of wisdom and seeking wisdom and trying to get better, but I don't ever wake up and feel like I'm wise. If I did, I'd stop reading the books, right? If I did feel wise, I'd stop trying to meet people who can educate me on different topics. I never feel satisfied with what I know. A second thing is, running for office, there are a lot of pressures that come with that. I've actually advised people who are considering running for office, who are in office, who are campaigning quite a few times. And I always tell them there are two things you need to win. One, you need the indomitable will to win because it's super competitive and it's super straining on you. Two, you need a supportive spouse. And at this point in my life, my wife I'm here because my wife is at home with 4 kids, right? The kind of scrutiny and pressure that running for office would bring upon my wife, upon my kids, is something that is super weighty for me, right? The kinds of time commitments. Our legislators right now are in session at the legislature. If you're on the Finance Committee or the Ways and Means Committee, you might be there till midnight tonight or till 1 p.m. or till 2 p.m. because you're trying to work on the budget and answer all of these questions about tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And these are all really important things. And you might be doing that while you're on Oahu because you flew in from Maui or you flew in from Kauai or you flew in from the Big Island. And meanwhile, your family is out in the cold there, right? So it is easy to demonize these folks in public office. And I'm guilty of it sometimes too, of criticizing them. I'm at a point now where I don't feel I could do a good job of that while also being a good husband and father. I'm also at a point in my life where I would much rather pour into those people and encourage them. I have quite a few friends in public office or who are considering runs for office that turn to me in their moments of crisis when they need advice or they need encouragement. And it happens more often than you would think, right? Somebody makes a remark, they didn't phrase it the right way, and all of a sudden social media
that has happened to me.
Is going crazy about them. Who do you turn to in that moment? A lot of people don't have someone they can turn to, right? Another thing about being a politician is you're constantly in fear that someone's going to take something you've said in private and then use it against you in public. So it's a very lonely, tough position. And I have a great amount of respect for the people that do it. Not all of them do it well, right? But not not all basketball players are good, right? Half of the league is below average, right? And there are other leagues that are less than the NBA in terms of quality. I appreciate the people who encourage me to run for office. I have encouraged other people to run for office, but I have no plans to run for office now or in the future. I do want to use whatever talents I have to help with some of these bigger problems like housing, which I was able to do. And so in whatever role I can play, however big or small, I'm happy to help. I just don't think for me, being a legislator or being a mayor or being a governor is where I could have the highest and best use of my talents while also caring for my family.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to talking stories with you in 10 years when you become mayor of Honolulu.
That's very kind.
Sorry, governor. My bad. Youngest governor in the history of Honolulu.
Well, I think I'm gonna. Linda Lingle, I think, is already. She's got to be pretty close. Yeah, I mean, so that's the other thing, right? So you go to Washington or you go to the Capitol and you go in the governor's office and you see the portraits of the governors on the wall, right? So, it's Burns, it's Ariyoshi, it's Waihee, it's Cayetano, it's Lingle, it's Abercrombie, it's Ige, now it's Green. And you think to yourself, these people are there for 4 or 8, or in the case of Ariyoshi, quite a bit longer. And they make these consequential decisions and their name is in the newspaper. And yet they only get there on the backs of dozens, if not hundreds of people who supported them, who never get any credit, who never get their name in the newspaper, who will not be mentioned in the history books. And so I think we overascribe importance to these positions, right? When in actuality, a politician is a production, right? Like when you see the speech, they probably didn't write the speech, right? When they make decisions about policies, they don't read all the policies because no person can read 3,000 bills and understand all of them. They rely on staff to help them with things. And so I think the most important thing is in all of these areas where leadership is happening, and it's not just government, it's business, it's nonprofits, it's labor, even faith, right? The important thing is that we have a lot of capable leaders and that they understand the burdens that come with leadership. They feel encouraged in leadership. They're seeking wisdom. In my ideal world, they are praying to God and seeking God's wisdom. And if you have a lot of leaders like that, that's when things get better. There's an idea that there will be some messiah or savior political figure who could run for governor of Hawaii and turn everything around just on the sheer, their sheer willpower, just on one person's back. And that is a loony fantasy. It's completely crazy. The only thing that results in durable change is when groups of people come together, they have a shared vision, and they coordinate their actions. It's never a single heroic individual.
I feel the same way as about the presidency.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I forgot to share the second part of his question, and he said maybe in the future, or do you feel like you can do more through nonprofit, which sounds like you feel like the running for office isn't what you're planning to do, but through your other, businesses and nonprofit work, you could probably make a lot more change.
Yeah. So I was in nonprofits for 4 years, and I've recently co-founded a company called Polcom. And I moved from nonprofit to for-profit because I realized that in order to do what I want to do next, I need to have a business that can sustain itself and that can fuel innovation. So Polcom, what we're doing is we're using AI and applying it to this problem of government and applying it to the problems of leadership. So one of the basic problems of leadership is, let's say you lead a large enterprise, Bank of Hawaii. You have 1,000 employees, you have all of these departments, you own real estate, you're affected by government policy all over the place. How do you process all the information of what's happening in government and make strategic decisions? And the answer is it's really hard because so much is happening. There's a tremendous value for leaders in filtering out the signal from the noise, right? Going through, to use your metaphor, the haystack and finding that needle. And so we're at a point now with AI, with large language models, where for the first time in human history, we can actually process everything that's happening in government, and we can find the useful insights for leaders. We can tell the leader of a nonprofit, here are the policies that affect your interests. Here's what you should do about it. Here's who you should contact to make a difference. We can do that for a labor leader, a nonprofit leader, a business leader, even a faith leader who wants to be involved. And so with my partner Seiichi and the team that we're building at Qualcomm, our belief is we can use technology to help solve this problem in Hawaii. Another thing we're doing is trying to help people coordinate their activities. So let's say a bunch of leaders get together and they're trying to reduce poverty. This is a goal that I think everyone has the goal of reducing poverty. I haven't met somebody who's like, you know what, I want more poverty. Everybody wants to reduce poverty. But the question is, if we all agree on reducing poverty, why doesn't anything happen? And part of it is, if you're the leader of a large enterprise, and that could be a nonprofit with 100 employees, it could be a business with 1,000 employees, when you step into a room to talk about reducing poverty, you don't bring the bank with you. It's just you. And so how do you make decisions as a group? And the answer is it's hard, because you have to find the center of the Venn diagram, the alignment between maybe 3 organizations or 30 organizations or 300 organizations. And the best politicians can do that. Somebody who's politically minded can think, how do I map these stakeholders and what is the thing we can all agree on, and let's rally the people. The difficulty is that takes a lot of time, and there aren't a lot of people with that skill. The question is, could AI do that? And the answer we've arrived at Qualcomm is yes. Actually, we can use AI to bring together 3 or 30 or 300 organizations, find the overlap in their interests, and help them to coordinate their activities to achieve some of these big goals, like reducing homelessness, reducing crime, reducing poverty. And the opportunity, with my partner Seiichi and the team we're building to do this feels like the best thing I could do right now, because I worked for the last 4 years in housing, and everyone in the state agreed that it was a problem, but it was hard to coordinate actions. I'd go into meetings with CEOs, and I won't use their names, right? But CEOs who really cared about this problem, maybe 10 to 15 of them. And in my darker moments, Kamaka, I would calculate the dollar value of the meeting in terms of their salaries. And sometimes we'd be having $10,000, $15,000 meetings, like an hour, right? Because these are people who are getting paid a lot of money, right? There were meetings at the government. There's a speech that I gave at the Building Beyond Barriers working group. If you look around the table, there are like 40 state officials at that table, state and county officials, who are all taking time away from their jobs to sit there for 2 hours. And half of the time they were getting yelled at by BJ Penn. The way that we come together to make these decisions, all of it is ancient. And by ancient, I mean politics. When we come together to make a decision, if you've been to a committee meeting or an association meeting, those are the same kinds of meetings they were happening at the founding of the country. But how much has changed since then? We have a million times more information. We're all distracted. We don't have time to even sit down for an hour to read. How can we actually process all this information and make good decisions? And the answer is right now, and I know this because I've worked with people at the highest levels of government, nonprofit, business, labor, even faith leaders. The answer is people are just not making good decisions, or they're not making decisions at all. They're freezing because of the information and the complexity. So, I think God speaks to me and shows me what I should be working on. This vision for this came to me about 3 months ago, and it was very clear from the start that I could build a team, develop a tool that would help people coordinate their actions and address some of these bigger, complex systemic issues in Hawaii. The vision is now named Qualcomm. It now has employees and a team, and that's what I'll be doing for the foreseeable future. It could be 5 years. It could be 10 years. I don't know. But I do know that I think when we succeed, and it could be even 2 years from now, we'll be able to bring some of Hawaii's leaders together and allow them to coordinate their actions to solve problems in a way that they just couldn't before.
All right, so some people, when they're on stage, they say something so profound and good, everybody starts clapping, they just drop a mic. You just dim the lights. I don't know what happened, but the lights just went off. So what you were saying was so good. Qualcomm is going to be a success. like our electricity could even handle the knowledge that was being poured right now. And I gotta say, what Koa Cassidy said about you being made in the image of ChatGPT, I think you are right, Koa Cassidy. I think the statement is true. After hearing all of that, I agree. But mahalo, everybody. For the social media fan questions, make sure you leave some for our next guest, and maybe your question will make it on the podcast. All right, so coming to the back end of the podcast, and hopefully you don't shut down all of our lights again with your amazing brain. I like to ask all of my guests the same question about keeping it aloha. I like to know in your life, how do you keep it aloha?
Yeah. For me, so, the Bible tells us that there is no room for fear if you are full of love, right? And I believe that is true, where in the moments of darkness or doubt or uncertainty, anxiety, depression, whatever you want to call it, you can pretty much instantly end any of that by just filling yourself with love. And it's usually love for someone else. So when I think of keeping it aloha, for me, it's loving my wife, loving my kids. When I'm at church at men's ministry, which I'm going to tonight, loving on the men that I'm with. When I'm out at work, loving the people I'm meeting with. I mentor a few people. I still work with some students, loving on them. And what I find is the more I do that, the less I think about myself. And the less I think about myself, the happier I am. So keeping it aloha for me is just loving people. And if you love everyone and all you do is love, it's a happy life.
Oh, I love that.
There you go.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, super cool. That felt like aloha in every bubble kind of answer. Shout out to Kalea Hot Waters for sponsor the Keep It Aloha podcast. Yeah, no, that's a totally beautiful answer. And I feel like I get a lot of energy from the love I get, the love that I give, all of it. I feel like it's this big reciprocation of energy and love, and I think the more love you have in your life, the happier you are.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask. I'm sorry, I'm still a little rattled from the light stuff. I forgot what I was gonna ask.
You're good.
I'm like, how did that happen? That's never happened in 100-something episodes.
Yeah.
I think it's like a sign from God or something.
Oh, well,
yeah.
It's a good sign, I hope.
It's a good sign. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. I know. So you're a family of 5. You're 32 years old, living in Kakako, $4,000 of rent. How do you do that? Like, how is it possible that somebody like you in their 30s with a family of 5, 4 kids and a wife, can afford a place like this?
Yeah. Not saving for retirement is part of it. A bigger part of it, though, is, I've been lucky for the last 15 years. I developed skills in speaking and writing and solving problems and strategy, learned about government affairs, learned about advocacy, where I can create a company that allows me to sustain myself and to sustain my family. But broader than that, like bigger than that, honestly, I just pray. When I moved to Maui, the first month I was on Maui, I looked at the rent we were paying, and I looked at my income, and I looked at my wife's income, and I was like, I don't know if we can afford food, right? Like after rent, after health insurance, all of the expenses, like I just don't know how we're going to get there. But we make too much to qualify for a lot of assistance, but it's just things are really expensive. In that situation, I just prayed. And fortunately, one of my good friends, Carrie Kapoy, was able to find some work for me to do doing strategic planning. And I was able to apply some of the skills I had and made more than enough to cover my rent and to pay all the bills. I don't think that happened because of me. I think it happened because I prayed. The same thing happens in my life today. I don't think I can afford the rent because of anything I did. I think God created a path where I can get to this point. And I don't know where exactly that path leads. I just know that if I believe and I pray, things get better, right? They get better in my marriage with my wife. They get better in the way that I'm able to love my kids and be patient with them. They get better when I go to work and I work with my coworkers, or if I'm trying to sell some of the services Qualcomm offers, the sales calls go better. Literally every aspect of my life gets better when I believe and pray. And the more consistent and the more deliberate I am, the better things get. And so that's the answer to your question. I think it helps, right? Obviously, there are certain things financially that help if you want to earn more money. When I would teach university students, I told them you should learn valuable skills. And by valuable, I mean skills that people will pay you a lot of money for. There's some skills that people won't pay you a lot, and there are skills that are very valuable and people will pay you a ton for. And so just identify those skills and identify how you can get better at that skill and then put that into practice, right? So for me, obviously leaning into speaking and writing, which were both skills that people would pay for. Now, the skill of running a business is a skill that you can transfer to anything, right? Once you know how to run a business, you know how to create a product people want and sell it to them and follow all the laws so you don't go to jail.
Pay your taxes.
Right. You can actually do that anything, right? I'm sure if you wanted to, you could open up a detailing business or a car wash or any business and you can make it work because now you have the skills to do that. My general advice to young people who are trying to make it in Hawaii is figure out what skills are valuable and then use them and develop them. You know, there's some meta skills that I think are always valuable. So sales, or what we also call persuasion, which is very related to communication. They're all sort of the same thing, right? Which is just, can you relate to somebody? Can you persuade them of an idea? That's always going to be valuable, right? There are technical skills, being good with computers. Now it's AI. That's also very valuable. If you look at these tech companies, at the top of the tech company is usually somebody who's really good at sales, like a Steve Jobs, and somebody who's really good at tech, like a Steve Wozniak. And that's Apple. That's the story of Apple. If you develop one of those skills, the next skill is the skill of teamwork or collaboration. Because doing anything huge requires a huge team, right? Qualcomm, I'm not going to do it myself. Seiichi and I aren't going to do it with just the two of us. We have to build a whole team, right? And a whole business. And so can you create a vision that inspires someone to quit their job and come work with you, right? Can I convince an AI machine learning engineer, and hopefully they're watching this, quit your job at Google, quit your job at Anthropic, come back to Hawaii, work with Qualcomm, help us solve the systemic problems in Hawaii, because we can actually do that with technology, because we can help leaders make better decisions. Can you create a vision? Can you sell somebody on the vision? Can you get them to follow you? If you can do that, right, you can build something using your technical skills, you can sell it using your sales skills, and you can recruit people around you to help you build a business. You could do anything, right? And so it's not rocket science. It is something that's not taught in schools, because you go to school and it's math, science, English, you know, the traditional subjects. Our kids are homeschooled. And yes, they learn traditional subjects like math and English and all of that. But the biggest part of what we're teaching them, one is, you know, love God. And we think that faith is a firm foundation that you can build your life on. But two, if you do know these things, right? If you know how to build and you know how to sell and you know how to build a team, you'll always be okay, right? And you can choose then how far you want to go, right? Do you want to wake up at 5 a.m. and work, 12 hours a day, every day, to build a huge business? Maybe not. Maybe that's not for everybody. Do you want to get a remote job and work 4 hours a day and spend the rest of the time surfing or with your family? And you'll never be super rich, but you'll have the wealth of free time. You can choose that. And for my kids, I would just, when they're 30, right? I just want them to be able to have that choice, right? If they want to, my kids will joke. They'll be like, can we work at Qualcomm? Will we inherit Qualcomm, right? And I go like, if you want to, right? If it's right for you, like you don't have to. You just have to decide what makes me happy, what inspires my curiosity. Like you following this podcast, right? You're 168 episodes?
Something like that,
yeah. Like, well, let's just say more than 100 episodes means you've loved something enough to just keep doing and keep chasing it. And so I don't know that you want to chase living in a high-rise in Kaka'ako. I didn't. That was never a goal of mine. Nothing in my life. That was never, I want to live in Kaka'ako. It was, I want to live in a van at the beach. Then it was, I want to do poetry. Then it was, I want to do debate. Then it was, I want to teach. Then it was, I want to write. And then it was, I want to solve the housing crisis. And now it's, I want to build a business that solves problems for our leaders. I didn't choose any of that. Everything, like I said, came from an email or from somebody who took me from where I was looking this way and made me look that way. Everything came when I kneeled down and I prayed and I said, please, God, bring me a wife and a family. And God brought me a wife and a family. Or I sat down and I prayed, God, I really need some money. I can't afford the rent. I can't afford food. Like, can you bring me more work? And more work appeared. So that's a long answer. The short answer is, I don't think you should want to live in a high-rise in Kaka'ako. I think if somebody is young and they want to survive in Hawaii, they should just believe and pray and say, how can I contribute to this place and call this place home in the future? And if it's meant to be, it'll happen.
Amen.
Amen.
I love that. Okay, so what's the next 5, 10, 20 years look like for you? More kids? I mean, obviously we know Paulcom's gonna, hopefully go on for a very long time. But besides that, what's your future looking like?
10 years of building this company at least. We believe at Paulcom that the technology we're creating will not only be useful for solving problems in Hawaii, but will be useful for all people on planet Earth who want to come together to solve these political problems. We want to create technology that allows people to coordinate their actions and address these big social issues, big political issues, the big economic issues that they face, to know what's happening in government and to be able to impact it. And we think that that will result in a better world. For my family, our youngest is 2. Our older children are 10, 13, and 14. In the next 10 years, I would love to usher the 3 older ones off into the world to make sure that they feel prepared to sustain themselves, hopefully that they find supportive spouses, friends who love and care for them, that they're in positive environments and not smoking and drinking in a van at the beach, and that they feel confident that they can choose what they want to do. And then, for our baby, she'll be 12 in 10 years. And I'm hoping to just enjoy the whole way along of watching her develop and grow. My wife as well, Chanel is maybe the strongest person I've ever met. We don't have to talk about things that she's been through, but her faith has sustained her through things that I think most people would have just quit and given up on. And a big thing for her in the next 10 years is she's an artist. She's an oil painter. She does fine art.
Cool.
Her art is at the intersection of like Renaissance painting and high fashion today. So within the next 10 years, hopefully she's doing campaigns for brands like Louis Vuitton, right? And her artwork is gracing the walls of the great galleries of the world. And she's renowned in cities like London and Paris and New York, right? For both of us, what we think about is, if God has shown you a vision of how things can be, that possibility is something you have to just work toward, right? So I know that Paulcom is a great company because I've seen it. I saw myself go to Harvard. I saw myself win the writing contest. I knew that I would find a wife. I knew that it would work out. I know that the company will work out, and I know that we do the things that we're setting out to do. I also know that my wife is going to be an amazing artist, and I know that our kids are going to be great. So that's the next 10 years. Where things go after that, I don't know. I can't see that far into the future. And I'm sure there will be chance encounters and weird things that happen along the way. Emails that change the path. But I think the time horizon gets longer and longer for me, where when I co-founded Housing Hawai'i's future, I knew that I would only spend 3 to 5 years there. And I told them that. I was like, I cannot see myself doing this 6 years from now because I'll want to do something else.
Yeah.
And so 4 years of that and now this. But in this case, I look forward and I'm like, I think I can do this for 10 years, right? I'm at a point in my life where I know that the problems that I'll face along the way will be interesting enough. I know that the people I'll get to work with are awesome enough. That I could do this for a long time and build something great.
Awesome. Well, like I said earlier, I'm excited to catch up with you in 10 years when you're the governor of Hawaii. And you tell me if Chantal
Chanel.
Gosh, Chanel is a world-renowned painter artist
Yeah.
for Louis Vuitton and
Well, we'll
all of that.
bring a painting and we'll put it up on the wall.
Totally, we'll have it like right there.
We'll put it right there.
Yeah. Right on. Okay, so I like to ask all my guests this question as well. You are probably somebody who probably gets misjudged a lot because you're a local boy who speaks very well,
Sure.
fair complexion,
Yeah.
comb, nice hair.
Yeah.
So
Punahou grad. That's what they
exactly.
say. Yep.
Punahou grad.
Yep.
But I want to know, what is something you wish people knew about you that they don't?
Yeah, I guess. So I always lead with Honolulu Community College.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody introduces me as going to Harvard, I think my life is a testament to it doesn't really matter where you start, right? 2.9 GPA, working at Wahoo's Fish Tacos. The only reason I went to community college is because my mom said go to college or pay rent. 15 years later, 16 years later, I live in Kaka'ako. I have a wonderful life, abundance for my family. 4 children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a wonderful gift in itself, a wonderful wife. I would not have predicted any of that if I could go back 16 years. Even 3 years ago, I could not have predicted that, right?
Mm-hmm.
3 years ago, I'm like fumbling around on Tinder and Bumble, trying to find somebody, going on terrible dates. I didn't know that 3 years from now I'd be married with 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So can't know where things are going to go. You just have to figure it out along the way. And I think my life is a testimony to, if you follow your curiosity, and ideally if you follow God, and I was not following God in all of those 16 years,
Mm-hmm.
Miraculous things you cannot imagine can happen, and will happen, right? But I think it all relies on really listening. I was lucky even at times where I didn't consider myself a Christian, where I wasn't actively praying. God is never subtle with me.
Mm-hmm.
He will put me in conversations with people and they will say exactly what I needed to hear. Or a random email will come and bring me off on a whole new adventure. And at every step in my life, I've been blessed in that way. But I think that part of that blessing was a receptiveness and an openness to it. So I think what people don't see, if they see the hair or they see the shirt, is the guy who is wearing Billabong shorts and a Old Navy t-shirt, who just wanted to live in a van and was washing dishes at Wahoo's Fish Tacos. One last story about Wahoo's Fish Tacos. My manager there, who I will leave unnamed, wouldn't give me Thursdays off to go to the poetry slam. So there was a moment around February when I won my first poetry slam where I was like, hey, I need Thursday off, right? So to go to the poetry slam. I was always consistent. I was on time. I made every shift. And he'd be like, no, we need you to wash dishes. And I was like, get somebody else to wash the dishes. Like, I'm always here, right? Like, I've been doing this for 2 years. Like, find somebody else. And he was like, no, you have to wash the dishes. And I quit, right? At the time, that seems like a huge risk to me, right? That was leave my job washing dishes. Looking back at it now, I'm like, that's silly. It's silly that was a risk. But if you stack up enough of those risks that work out, right? The way that risk worked out is I went on April to the Grand Slam and I won and I became a state champion, right? I applied to Harvard and what do you know? I got in, right? I enter a writing contest. I win the contest. I decide to move to Maui to marry my wife. It's the greatest blessing in my whole life. And if you take enough of those risks, things work out. So I would just want somebody who sees this, whatever this is, to know that it's possible for everyone. Your life can be way better. And hopefully it happens faster than 16 years, but it can happen very quickly once you start moving in that direction.
Totally. You are truly inspiring and have a really awesome story. So I'm really excited for people to hear this. But before we end, we can't let you go until you share your life hack. So did you come ready with a life hack?
Yeah, it's very short and I've already beat this to death, but believe and pray is the only life hack I have. I don't have any generalizable advice. So career advice, I can't give career advice because all my jobs have come magically through email. I can't really give dating advice because I don't know if dating advice is talk to a girl online for 2 years, then talk on the phone for a month, and then move to Maui and marry her. She has 3 kids. That's not advice I would give. But in each of those situations, I tried to believe and pray and have faith that things would work out as they should. So that's the life hack. If you believe and you pray, everything will work out as it should.
You're living proof, so try it and let us know how it works for you.
Yes.
Okay. I got my last fast fave 5 questions. These are rapid fire answers, okay? Favorite childhood snack?
Ooh, karaage chicken from 7-Eleven.
Oh, nice. Favorite guilty pleasure?
Ooh, the 3rd matcha and occasionally the 4th matcha.
Sometimes the 5th? Is that
No, I'd never go there, but it'll happen one of these days.
Okay. Favorite rapper?
That's tough right now. I really like a guy named Deca, Deca.
Okay.
And my guilty pleasure rapper is Connor Price. He's like an Instagram rapper.
Okay.
Canadian.
That sounds familiar. Well,
Yeah.
I'll look it up. Okay. Favorite book?
This is tough. There are so many. The Bible, obviously. A book that I've or an author that I've read and reread is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So he wrote a book called Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness and Anti-Fragile and Skin in the Game, and a book called The Bed of Procrustes.
Oh, okay.
But Black Swan and Anti-Fragile are probably the 2 most famous of those books. Every year or every other year, I come back and I sort of reread those books, and I always glean something new. But it's hard for me to pick one, so sorry.
No, that's perfect. Okay, and last one. Favorite vacation destination?
Ooh, Japan, for sure.
Everybody else says Japan.
Me and my wife love Japan. I just love being in a place that is safe and accessible. Clean. The food is wonderful. The people are amazing. And from Hawaii, it's not too far to get there.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, that's all we have for you today. Mahalo so much for sharing your stories, talking stories with us today, and inspiring the youth and, our generation as well. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up? If not, tell us where we can find you.
Just thank you, Kamaka. Thank you, obviously, for having me on, but also thank you for being the Joe Rogan of Hawaii. So
I got more hair than him.
Well, if you think about it, when you bring on all of these different voices for a young person who's on Instagram, even if they're just getting a clip, they're getting exposed to all of these different paths, and not all of them will resonate. Some of them maybe even turn them off and be like, I don't want to do that. But that exposure of seeing so many different things is tremendously valuable. I think that's what Joe Rogan does that is great, is expose people to all kinds of different ideas, some of them crazy, but some of them really interesting. And you're doing the same thing for Hawaii and helping people to share their stories. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Where can we find you?
I am online. If you Google my name, Sterling, Sterling, Higa, Higa. There's a sterlinghiga.com. And then on Instagram, I don't really post. So if you follow me, you won't see much. But I am at Sterling Higa.
Well, we'll be tagging you, and these clips will be online. So
yes, those will be the only thing that will be the only thing I post in the near future. So follow me there.
Okay, well, go check them out. Mahalo, Sterling, for joining us on the Keep It Aloha podcast. Spread love, be kind to one another, and mahalo for listening to us today. We have new episodes every Thursday, so make sure you follow us and leave a review. I'm your host, Kamaka, and remember to always keep it aloha.